Over the last few years, we've had some great stories here on VINwiki about Audi and their cars. I love the Audi brand. My first cross-country drive was in a 2000 Audi B5 S4, televised on MTV True Life. And my only electric car, my only new car, my only leased new car is currently an Audi RS e-tron, which my wife loves, and it's, I suppose, growing on me just a little bit. But they have such an amazing selection of cars and great stories over the years. So today I thought it would be a whole lot of fun to compile our top 10 Audi stories from VINwiki. And today's video is brought to you by BetterHelp. Last year I was going through a lot in life and all the stresses, all the things were piling up, but there was an issue that I really needed a third party's perspective on. When we arrive at our conflicts and our problems, a lot of times, we see it from our perspective and lack the detachment and the ability to be objective, and that's really what I needed through a professional, and BetterHelp was a great way to find it. I actually clicked on a BetterHelp link in another video from Tyler Hoover, saved 10% on my first month, and got matched really easily with the right therapist to help me talk through my issues. They make it so easy because you just go onto their website or their app, answer a few questions about yourself and what you're going through, what you're looking for, and they match you with a great professional who can help. They also make it really easy to change if it's just not the right fit. So if you're dealing with depression, anxiety, a conflict, an issue at work, or if you're just looking for somebody to talk to, BetterHelp can help. And right now, if you click the link in the description below, or if you visit betterhelp.com/VINwiki, you will save that same 10% on your first month, and you'll get the help you need with BetterHelp. So visit them now at the link in the description below to thank them for their support of VINwiki and get help with whatever it is that you're going through in life. But today we've got our top 10 Audi stories from over the years here on VINwiki. So the idea of one day tracking down one of these and perhaps even resurrecting it to the point of becoming a Cannonball car again is really, really fascinating. So in the decade that I spent researching all the problems and all the issues to explore and understand as I approached the idea of a Cannonball run, you run into a lot of other interesting facts sort of in the periphery of Cannonball history. And one of them was that Brock Yates, the founder of the event in the 70s, the editor of Car and Driver, had sort of formed a lot of relationships in the automotive world. And one of those was with the ownership staff of Brumos Audi in Jacksonville, Florida. And among the promotional things that they did was a special partnership car. Now, various manufacturers and dealers had sort of tried to do this because obviously kind of the folklore and the mystique of the event from the 1970s was pretty significant, but also the idea of the movie coming out in '81 and just this sort of coming into more of a national spotlight made it quite a marketable idea. And so there were legends of there being a Cannonball 911, and I've never come up with one of those. I'd love to. If you have one, call me. But I did find out that Brumos Audi and Brock Yates had partnered to do a dealer-installed package that they called the Audi 4000S Quattro Brock Yates Cannonball Edition. And there were 12 of them built in 1985. And they were all white. They had a special red, white, and blue stripe on them, and a special set of Gotti wheels, and a Nardi steering wheel, and special Recaro seats with Cannonball patches. And Brock Yates had hand signed the rear trunk lids on every car. They had special stickers, special badges, and they were numbered 001 to 012 for 12. And I had looked far and wide because, I mean, who else is going to appreciate such an automobile as much as I might, and just couldn't find one. And you never saw them listed. If you Google it, they weren't going to find much. But one day I happened to across a forum posting from a few years prior. This was probably, I was probably looking after the record in 2014, and sometime in 2012, these two gentlemen had been talking on Audi World about each owning these Brock Yates Quattros. And one said, yeah, I've had it forever. I still daily drive it. Had to do some engine stuff a few thousand miles ago, but it's an awesome car. And the other one said, yeah, I've had one for forever. But I've had it in the garage since the early 90s, and it hadn't really run. And I joined the forum, make enough posts that I can have private messaging capabilities, and I start blasting them, hey, do you still have this car? Can you tell me anything else about it? Do you know where any of the others are? And do you want to sell it? And so I never get a response. And probably a year passes, and we've done 2904, where it's this kind of cheap car, Cannonball, 24 hours of lemons amalgamation. And so the idea of one day tracking down one of these and perhaps even resurrecting it to the point of becoming a Cannonball car again is really, really fascinating. So I continue looking around, and I actually find out that I've got a friend in common with one of the people that was in that conversation on Facebook. And so I message him and say, hey, I've messaged this guy on Facebook, but you're the only friend we have in common, and I'm assuming it's going into some weird spam folder and he's not noticing it. Well, hopefully. And he's not just ignoring me. So they said, I'll reach out to him, see what they say. So that person sends along my phone number, and this person from Seattle calls me. And as it turned out, he went to Georgia Tech, where I went to school, and actually where my parents went to school, and he was there in some of the same classes as my mother back in the early 80s. And so he had bought this car brand new soon after that, and had continued to daily drive it to this day in Seattle. And it had about 275,000 miles or so, he thought. The odometer had stopped long ago. But he loved the car, had no interest whatsoever in selling it, but the only thing he'd ever heard was that this other person that was on Audi World had the other car. So I'm like, well, do you have any other way to contact him? No, and we just kind of left it there. Out of the blue, probably 30 days later, I get an email from the previous now owner of this car's wife's email account. Says, hi, I don't really check this forum anymore, but I saw that you were interested in the car. You know, I keep telling myself I'm going to go through it and fix it all up and get it back on the road, but if I'm honest with myself, I don't know that that's ever going to happen. And sort of in this window, unfortunately, Mr. Yates had passed away to Alzheimer's. And so whatever appreciation the car now had was relatively new, because if we're honest, you know, through the 90s and early 2000s, Audi 4000 S Quattro was not viewed as the most desirable form of transportation, and the novelty of being a Brock Yates or Cannonball edition was certainly waning. But it was sort of back into the forefront, and I don't know what had made him contact me, but he said, you know, as I think about it, I'm probably not going to fix the car up, but I want to make sure that it goes to someone who will appreciate it. So I said, well, I think you found him, and I sent him articles from CNN and Jalopnik and everything that had covered our record in 2013, and I said, I can assure you I'll appreciate it as much as anybody on earth would. So he emails me back and says, all right, well, let's talk about how this might work. He said, I really don't know what it's worth. I said, good, I don't either. But what I would like to do is use it for this upcoming 2904 race that we're going to do again. And this limits my budget, and I'm not trying to say that the car is worth the $1,500 that I can generally spend. That's what I'd spent on the salvage title 12-owner 2-accident S55 that I'd run in 2015. And I want it. I don't know what to pay you for it, but I can pay you that in this circumstance, and I can also justify that fundamentally the car is worthless. There's no possible way that I invest the money it will take to make it run and ever get anything back out of it, so that anywhere near it. So why don't we just say this? I'll pay you $1,500, and if you ever want it back for whatever I've invested in it, you're more than welcome to it. He said, that sounds fair. You just have to let me come down and drive it when you get it running. And to this day, it still sits in my warehouse. We haven't gotten around to fixing it yet, but the moment that it's running, I'll place a call to him.
So I've been reviewing cars for a long time, but when I first got into the business, it's very hard to get invited to certain drive events. So you can easily get invited to like a Ford or a Kia or some normal car, but if a German manufacturer invites you, it's very difficult to get invited to Mercedes, BMW, and Audi. So I got a call to be involved in an Audi program in 2007. And I said, oh, yeah, I'm in. I'm pretty new at doing this. I was Oprah's automotive expert. But random hits on TV, and I've been reviewing cars. I kind of used it as a launch point. But by 2007, I was kind of getting into it, but I wasn't the premium people. There's like levels. You're actually graded as a journalist. Like, are you A, B, C? Now I'm an A+ because I'm North American Car and Truck of the Year, and I'm a World Car Juror. But if you're not either of those, you're lucky you get invited to these things. So Audi's doing this program called the Mileage Marathon. They were bringing diesel to the US. We all remember that. They're bringing not just the Q5, the Q7, which is the first one to hit. They're bringing the A3 TDI, all the TDI lineup. So they brought vehicles over from Europe, and they were doing a coast-to-coast drive to prove fuel economy. And so what they did is they had different journalists do different waves. So only a few people did the whole full coast-to-coast. And one of them worked for the Boston Globe. And I didn't know him because I wasn't part of the A-list journal reviewers at the time. So I kind of showed up probably as like a C or D list, just grateful to be there. So I showed up mid-pack. I was doing just 2 waves. That's all I was invited for. I was happy to take, I would have taken 1 wave. I was just happy to be invited. So I show up, and the guy who's in charge, Andrew, we'll just call him Andrew, comes up to me and he says, hey, listen, could you do me a favor? Absolutely. Like, I'm the newbie here. What can I do for you? I need you to, because usually you partner up, and then you switch drivers. I need you to partner up with this person, but you have to drive first in the morning. This person cannot drive until the driver switch point. I'm like, okay. Like, I'm not going to question it. Not too many women in review cars, and not too many people get invited to these things. So I'm going to shut my face, and I'm just going to get in the car with this total stranger, and I can get along with anybody. So I get in the car with this guy, and I'm driving. This is the first day. And all we're trying to do is hyper miles, so you can get the best fuel economy, because the winner gets a bottle of champagne at the end of each one. So we're driving to Durango, Colorado. That was the first run. So I forgot where we started, but we ended up in Durango. So we're driving and we're hyper miling, and he's like super anal about it. You have to coast, and you get to a traffic light, shut the car off. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're making this not even fun anymore. You're just making this like torturous. But I played along because I was asked to. And so I drove the first half, switched in the afternoon. He seemed totally fine, just a little weird, but whatever. Lunchtime goes, we switch. I drive, he drives, everything seemed fine. We won. He goes, see, I told you, you got to listen to me. We're the winner. Because we got hypermiling down. At the time, we were driving the Q5 diesel. So there was Q5s, there was cars and SUVs. So I'm like, okay, so the next day we're supposed to drive the A3 TDI, which is a wagon, essentially. But very cool car. I love them. We had won the bottle of champagne the night before, and I'm not really a drinker. I drink like nice tequila. He's chugged the whole bottle himself. I mean, we're talking about a big bottle of champagne that you should share with others. And I knew a couple of the other people on the wave, and they were like, yeah, don't let him drive in the morning. He's a big drinker. I'm like, oh, now I got it. So I got the alcoholic. All right, got it. So now I know I have to drive the morning and maybe see if I can delay the driver swap so that I don't find myself him driving with a DWI. So morning comes, he gets in the car, we get in this A3 TDI, and it had rained pretty heavily the night before. And we're going from Durango, Colorado to Las Vegas. So this is like the second to last run. All right, fine. So I'm driving, everything's fine. We do our driver swap. And I'm like, okay. So what I didn't know, and I found out later, was that because of the rain, they had taken us off this dirt road and moved us onto a pavement. But apparently, the people that were doing the programming of the GPS, because you just followed the GPS, failed to do the 2 A3 TDIs. The other one is a journalist who I still talk to, Don Buffamonte, and he was writing with Sebastian Blanco, who's also, we're still writers, we're still all friends. And so it was just the 4 of us that had this specific vehicle. Well, they were ahead of us, so I don't know what happened. So we're now driving, and it says turn right. And I'm like, this is dirt. I go, people that own A3 TDIs or who would buy one are going to be driving in dirt. There's something wrong. He's like, oh, no, trust me. I know what we're doing. And he has no racing experience, no high-speed driving experience. He's a car reviewer, and most of them have 0 racing or real performance car experience. He's hammered down. We're going up and down these hills in the Mojave Desert. And I'm like, you got to slow down. You got to slow down. We don't know what's over these hills. And I'm like, I wouldn't do that. And I'm a racer. I'm like, if it's blind, you don't know what you're going to see. Oh, I got it. I'm thinking, oh God, we're going to die, So I'm watching him as we reach the top of this hill, and he's hammered down. We had to be doing 90 miles an hour. And I'm like, this is so stupid. It's just stupid in general. We come down the hill, and I look up, because racers keep their vision up, and there's a huge boulder in the road. I'm like, oh, shit. I reach over, and I slam down on his right leg, and we launch over the boulder. He's swearing at me, like, what the hell are you doing? I reach over, and I shut the car off. I go, we're done. I go, he killed it. He goes, what are you talking about? He says, why did you hit my leg? I said, if I didn't, you would have hit the brakes. That's everyone's natural reaction. The nose would have come down. You would have hit that boulder. And we would have done a nose over tail, and we'd probably be dead in the desert, or they would take a long time for us to find us. He just looked at me. No clue about nose diving. And if you accelerated, told him you launched over it. I said, but we probably tore the oil pan off, and that's why I shut the car off. And he just looks at me. I can't believe it. I said, well, there's obviously a mistake. We should not be on this road. So sure enough, they gave us phones. So I called this guy, Andrew, and I go, we have a little problem. I said, we had an accident in the desert. What do you mean you're in the desert? You should be on the pavement. I go, nope, we're in the desert. Believe it or not, there is perfect cell service in the Mojave Desert. So they go, we're going to find you. So we're waiting in the desert. Now remember, this guy was a drinker. And it's hot in the desert. And I'm wearing black pants and a white shirt, long pants, jeans. And he's wearing pants and long sleeve shirt. He goes, well, I'm going to change. So courtesy, I turn my back. He changes his clothes. And he's just sweating profusely. Just sweating. In the meantime, I said, well, I didn't have anything to change into, but I had to go to the bathroom. So I had to pee in the desert. So they go, well, there starts a bucket list. That was far from on my list of like, I will add this to a bucket list. And in retrospect, that could have been very dangerous. You know, scorpions, you don't know what you're going on. So in retrospect, yeah, that could have been pretty painful. So I come back and he had literally drank all the water in the car. Because he was just sweating. He just couldn't cool his body down because he had been drinking so much the night before. I didn't stay out and go drinking with the guy. I went to bed. So they can't find us. We get a call back. We can't find you. Why are you not on the route? I go, we're on the route. He says, we're still going to try and find you. We're going to try and backtrack. We've got the cavalry coming. Okay. So I decided I better call my husband, let him know what's going on. I go, hey, Paul, I'm in the Mojave Desert. This is what happened. And he goes, take a picture. I go, take a picture of what? He goes, everything. He goes, take a picture of the rock, the car, the damage. Take a picture of the GPS unit. Take a picture of everything. Everything. I go, why? He goes, they're going to blame you. I go, I wasn't even driving. He goes, they're going to blame you. I'm like, I didn't do anything wrong. I was the one that saved this car. Fine. Finally, 3.5 hours later, no water. This guy's still sweating like he's going to drop. I'm dying. I got an umbrella because it was, rain. I figured at least I had an umbrella. And I'm standing there in the desert like, I'm going to kill this guy. Believe it or not, later on, a farmer comes by in a truck. He goes, you guys okay? I go, well, not really. I said, you're kind of waiting. He goes, oh, yeah. He goes, there's boulders in these roads all over the place. So this road was just before we got to lunch. So at the end of the road was the lunch stop. So he says, well, there's a restaurant about 2 miles up the road. I'm like, well, I'm not going to walk 2 miles in the desert with an alcoholic and leave this car behind. And we also had our gear with us, camera gear and whatever. So 3.5 hours later, coming from the opposing direction is 3 Audi service vans filled with German mechanics and someone with a Q7 TDI. They come out, they're all talking to each other in German, blah, blah, blah. I can't understand half of what they're saying. And the guy gets in the driver's seat. I get in the passenger seat and I look at him and I go, I hope I saved your engine. And he looks at me like I have 3 heads. I said, yeah. I said, that's the GPS. It sent us on this path. Because my husband forewarned me, so I'm locked and loaded here in my head. And I said, this is what happened. And he goes, I don't know how you got there. He cleared the screen. I'm thinking, you bastard. I thought, okay, now this is how the game is going to play. I said, well, I shut down your engine. I said, I doubt this thing is an AccuSump, which for those people who don't know is an extra tank of oil in case an engine failure keeps the engine lubricated. It's time to shut it down. A lot of race cars have it, or they use windage trays, a lot of different things. So he just kind of looked at me like, lady, what's your problem? He didn't say a word. Got out of the car, and then they moved the guy's luggage to the other car, but they didn't move mine. So I'm like, oh, we're going to play this game. See, they don't know who they're talking to. Barking up the tree with me is a big mistake. So I grabbed my luggage and I heaved it into the back of the Q7. They go, we're going to drive you. I go, no, bullshit. I'm driving. We got to the destination and this guy, Andrew, and a bunch of executives were there apologizing, really sorry, this happened, da-da-da. And I said, well, I don't know what happened. I said, but we were definitely on the wrong road, and that's where the GPS went. And they go, do you have proof? And I go, it's funny, I do. So I pulled out my small iPhone at the time, and I showed them all the pictures. They're like, oh. I said, oh, yeah, I got pictures of all of this. I said, And I don't know what the story is. I said, I shut down the motor. I said, I hope I saved it. So they were super apologetic. They gave us a whole bunch of clothing and, they got us to the hotel and everything's good. So that was in September. In November, I'm at the SEMA show, the Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Show. And by the way, I never saw Royal again after that. He went his way. He got fired from the Boston Globe and he was in Thailand and he's back. I don't know. He's got doing his own thing. And I'm still doing this because I'm crazy. I get to the SEMA show, and it's the end of the show, and we have a booth there for Classic Tube, and I'm standing there. A guy walks up, and he's wearing an Audi Mileage Marathon shirt. And I thought, well, you wouldn't have got one of those unless you were a journalist. So I said, oh, are you a journalist? He says, no. I said, well, you have a Mileage Marathon shirt. He goes, oh, I work for Audi. I said, you do? I go, what do you do for Audi that you would have that shirt? This is very interesting how this all kind of fell together. And he goes, oh, because we had all of the German cars come in, and every single one had a computer in it, and we were collecting all the data and fixing the cars and sending them back to Europe to prove that they were getting good fuel economy here in the US and how people were driving them and the full results. And he goes, I said, really? I said, did you have an A3 TDI that was damaged? He goes, oh my God, there was some girl who was driving that thing. I go, stop right there. Stop there. And I said, I'm correcting the record. I corrected the whole record and told him the story. He goes, really? I go, I got pictures to prove it. He goes, wow. He goes, well, I'll tell you one thing. He goes, you saved the motor. So I told him I started the bucket list. At the time, I had an S6 with a V10 engine in it, the Gallardo motor. He sent me a huge box of Audi Mileage Marathon things and S6 stuff, and it was great. So in the end, I corrected the record. But it's funny, if you ask those other two journalists to this day and people that were at that event, everyone remembers that I was the one who was in the wreck in the desert in the passenger seat.
Last week, I got a text message from Nick Underwood at Audi of Birmingham. Now, Nick is a character in one of my more better-known VINwiki car stories because when he worked with me at Lamborghini Atlanta, his first act of business was to buy a motorcycle that he lacked either the insurance to protect or the skills to ride, and he immediately shot himself into the back of a Porsche Panamera and destroyed its rear glass and his face. We had a very entertaining evening of shrewdly negotiating his hospital bills down to a reasonable price. But Nick has stayed in different parts of the car industry since then, and he now manages Audi of Birmingham. And his text message said that I should be proud of him because he had worked out some elaborate Ed Bolian style deal. I said, well, please tell me more. And he explained that he had just bought $4 million worth of Audi e-trons. We did a video a couple of months ago talking about the insane depreciation of luxury electric vehicles, and that's been up to 4% per month for the last year or two, and especially the ultra high-end, the RS e-tron GT, was on that list. US consumers simply aren't adopting those cars quite as much as we like to see, or the government at least would like to see, especially at price points up to $160,000. And so he said that earlier this month, at the beginning of February, when all of the financing incentives and all the lease programs came out, he put them next to each other and recognized that if you stacked all the rebates on top of each other and discounted the selling price as aggressively as you could, and then you took the most favorable lease conditions coupled with some one-pay lease terms, adding on different programs and things like that, the lease residual for a year was actually higher than he could sell the car. Now, when you look at a lease, you've got your cap cost, which is how much you're effectively financing. It'd be the loan amount if it were a normal loan. And then you've got the residual, and you're paying that difference divided by the payments plus the interest. If the cap cost and the residual are the same, or if the residual is higher, then you can effectively be financing negative money over that term. Now, there's still going to be some interest, potentially some taxes and fees and things like that. But as he explained it, this was going to be an impossibly cheap way for his customers to own these cars. And I said, well, Nick, if it's an Ed Bolian style deal, should I come and get one? And he said, well, I don't really think of you as an EV guy. I certainly don't think of myself as an EV guy, but he said, you probably should. I mean, it's just dumb not to. And I said, well, that's not normally the thing you want to hear a car salesman say because it tends to not be all that honest. But as he explained it, he was correct. In fact, even though I don't have any real interest in driving a brand new electric vehicle or leasing an electric vehicle, I knew that my wife could certainly use one. Her GL63 just passed 120,000 miles, which means, like all aging AMG cars, it's gotten rather unreliable and expensive on maintenance. And so I would save the cost of this lease, even with the taxes and everything, in just tires, brakes, and oil, not to mention gas. And my wife drives, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 miles a day. It would not be a problem for any range of an electric car. But with the range these cars were supposed to have, it seemed pretty interesting. Now, they say they have like 280, 290 miles worth of range, but then of course it tells you that it's supposed to only charge to 80% for the health of the battery, which matters not on a lease. But anyway, I was very interested in kind of exploring the EV future. I really liked what Randy Popes did a couple of years ago. He bought an old ratty Tesla Model S, not because he wanted an electric car, but just because he said, as a journalist, as somebody in this industry, I owe it to anybody that cares about my opinions to really dig in and understand what electric cars are all about. Now, we compared the Tesla Model 3 to gas-guzzling supercars back in Car Trek 8, and I made it pretty clear that I'm just not really there. And, I'm not here espousing my beliefs or my ideas as some exotic car hacks way for everyone to enjoy the same thing. I like what I like because of the way that I drive and what I do. And for that, I don't really need, want, or care about an electric car, but it does behoove me to try to learn more about it. And so this felt like a good thing. Beyond that, I have never had a new car. I did for a day own a brand new Range Rover in 2014 before I exported it to Russia at a $45,000 profit. That's just because that's what we all did back then. But never had a new car, nor has my wife. And so the idea of being able to experience that sounded like an awful lot of fun. In fact, my editor for the VINwiki Car Stories actually had on order a Rivian long before the deliveries began. And when his turn came up, he was in the process of buying his first house and he chose to give up the allocation. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but having learned about it since then, I was like, hey, if we got cheap electric cars coming this way, Nick, give me 2 of them. And so I got him and my wife, and we all went out to Birmingham for the day to take delivery of or at least take the lease delivery of our brand new RS e-tron GTs. Now, this is a good opportunity to explain the difference between a new car lease and the simple lease that we talk about with Premier Financial Services. Now, Premier does this with pre-owned cars, and this is not a normal like rental lease where at the end of it, I'm just going to turn these cars back into Audi. At the end of a Premier lease, or at any point along the way with a Premier lease, you can actually sell the car, take your equity, trade the car in, trade for something else, just pay it off and own it. And then at the end, you are still responsible for the residual. This is a strategic financing arrangement that gives you the tax benefits of a lease that I will enjoy on these Audis, as well as, your lower payments, lower down payments, and everything that you get with a normal exotic car loan. And so it's a great program, but very, very different, because I do not sit here saying it is a great idea to buy new cars or lease cars and not to buy electric cars, certainly not new ones. But of course, I'm not buying it, I am just renting it. And after everything, the payment on these cars came out to like $250 a month, plus the fees and taxes and stuff like that. But again, less than I would have paid on consumables for her gas SUV, which she'll maintain if she needs to drive more kids around or do the things that she does. So it was a really interesting arrangement to prolong the life of a car that was certainly getting up there, at least in unreliability, if not real miles compared to a Toyota or anything like that. And she loves it. And I'll be honest, the novelty of a new car with all these fancy buttons and stuff was interesting. It's very different than driving a Diablo or a Mercy or a Spiker or something like that. And so I was intrigued. But most of all, I was intrigued by what Nick was doing. When you think about the new car business or the used car business, the car dealership business model, finding strategic deals and taking advantage of whatever the opportunities are out there is really how you become successful. And I was very, very proud of Nick to have figured this out. Now, I have no idea how many more of these this will apply to, but these are the February leasing programs for the RS e-tron GT. Now, we had to get the top of the line model, the RS, versus just an e-tron GT, because that's where the sweet spot was in terms of the discounts available, as they were trying to emulate some of the government incentives that the car doesn't qualify because it's not made in America and things like that. But regardless, it was a really, really unique deal. Now, I believe these kinds of deals are going to continue to pop up more and more often across all manufacturers. So if there is an electric vehicle that you like, keep an eye out, talk to your dealer, and let them know, like, when something like this happens, maybe not to this extent, that you want to be the first call because you want to come in and pick. Now, by the time he called me, he wanted to make sure that the deals were actually funding and things like that. So I think he had sourced a little over 20 of them, and he'd sold 13 or 14. He had 4 left. We took 2, and the other 2 were sold by the time we got there the next day. He's trying to get more, so if you'd like to replicate this deal, feel free to contact the team at Audi Birmingham. They are well familiar with how it works and what it takes. And for them, this helps their RS allocation. For other cars, it just helps the numbers for the dealership, even if each individual deal isn't all that profitable. But that's really what the new car business model is all about. Get the volume, meet the bonuses, all the things, and at the end of the year, usually it becomes a very, very big success. And so, great job, Nick. Thank you to Nick and all the team at Audi Birmingham for making it possible. And the car is phenomenally fast. So this is effectively a Taycan Turbo S with Audi rings on the front of it. So it's supposed to have the equivalent of like 637 horsepower, goes 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds. And so my wife is now hauling the kids around in a car that's faster than any of the Lamborghinis that I've ever owned. And I love it. You know, it's not that it's really that dramatically fast most of the time. It drives around like a golf cart and makes its whizzy noises and stuff like that. But it is very pretty. It's very nice to have all this newness. I will say that the moment you drive it, the first thing that happens to most of us is that if you exceed the speed limit by 1 mile per hour, it starts dinging and flashing all these errors. And it takes several presses of a button to finally get through a menu to turn off these traffic speed limit sign alert ding thing. So some of this stuff is super annoying, and it makes me glad that my Mercedes don't even have a radio that works. But regardless, it is the way of the world now, I suppose. And I am, I guess, very, very happy to have joined the future. But I'm also pretty happy that in a year or so I get to give the future back.
I just rip out there with my buddy who turned out to be a horrible getaway driver. So I work for a wholesale dealership out of Cleveland called Neo Classics. We have an inventory probably about 115 cars, and we have our turn and burns, and then we have our classics, and then we just recently picked up a Ferrari that was owned by Kendall Gill from the Chicago Bulls. He bought it brand new. It's a great car. It's the first gated Ferrari I've ever driven. I love them. I absolutely love gated Ferraris. But we're not a buy here, pay here. So what we do is every once in a while, some guy might owe $300. He doesn't have the proper money, so we'll do that. And last month I had a stack of papers for 5 cars. It ranged from about $150 to probably about $400. And then I had one that was outstanding by like 3 months that I don't know how it slipped through. I think my boss might have called him a few times, but it was for an Audi A8L. It was a big, beautiful lanyard of a car. Most of the customers who come to buy cars from us pay cash in 10s and 20s, which is the whole reason. And this is the car why we had to buy a money counter. We didn't set up a payment plan with the guy because we're not a buy here, pay here. It was just a good gesture for us. Because when they showed up to buy the car, the guy was all hard. And then when the car was sitting out front with the temp tag on, he was like a little girl in a candy store. He's like, yeah, I want this car, I want this. Oh, I'm so happy for this. They were driving an ML350 with temp tags on it. So somehow this guy, I feel like they came into money recently, doing whatever he did for a living. So we ended up dealing with this guy, and he's like, I'll be back next week to pay the toll. And when he came in with a substantial amount of cash for this car, I kind of assumed he'll be back for it. And he didn't. So the temp tag was 45 days, and I think it was on day 60. So I'm like, you know what? The car was still in our name because he never came back for the title. I had a set of keys for it. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go get this car. So I Google the guy's address, and it's a trailer park on the west side of Cleveland. It's probably like an hour and a half outside of the west side, and I'm on the east side. So I go on the book face, and I'm like, hey, anybody want to go with me to go get this car? Because I need to get this car back now. So we jump in this C300 we got, and I just rip out there with my buddy who turned out to be a horrible getaway driver. We get to this trailer park, we circle around, I circle around, and of course it's the nicest car in this trailer park. And I hit the unlock button as I go past, and it makes the loudest click that I swear echoed off of every trailer in this place. And I'm like, crap. So we circle around again, and in the meantime, the whole cul-de-sac for this trailer park has 6-inch speed bumps, which are horrible for getting around. You gotta crawl over it doing 2 miles an hour. So we pull back around, I drive down about 3 trailers, and I get out and I just leisurely walk up the car. And I jump in the car, and I take the key and I go to put it in the slot that a lot of Audis have, and there's no slot there. It was a push button. So that was my first mistake. So I sit there and I push the start button, and it takes like 3 to 4 seconds to start, which seems like an eternity when this is happening. And I told my buddy, drive around around the cul-de-sac in case I got to jump back in. And by the time I get the car started and out of this driveway, I don't see him. I'm like, where did he go? So I fly over these stupid speed bumps and I jump out, I make a right and then a right again. Because this trailer backed up to a main road. And my biggest fear was this guy's gonna come out of this main road shooting at me, that his car just got stolen. I fly back up, I pass the trailer, and I look to the corner, and just then's when my buddy pulls up. I'm like, crap. Because he had my license plate, he had everything in this car. We were supposed to meet at the gas station around the corner. And I just go. I'm like, you know what? I'm out of here. And before all this started, I called my buddy Johnny Sabo because I knew his detail shop was right there. His car storage place was right there. Because I wanted to get to his shop so I could check this car over with a pair of gloves, just in case there's some sort of substance in this car. Because I didn't feel like driving the 2.5 hours home. And his shop turns out to be 30 miles away from where I was. And I thought it was way close. I'm like, really? So I fly up there, I'm driving down the freeway, no license plate on this car. I pass 3 state troopers in this 30 miles. I'm like, oh God, they're gonna really pull me over for this. And I gotta explain this because I have no clue where my getaway driver's at, who's got my license plate, who's not picking up his phone. I come whipping in there, I whip around the building. I see his GT3 RS that he had at the time sitting there. I'm like, good, this is the right location, not his other shop. So I open the door and I rush in. I'm like, dude, I need a pair of gloves right now. And there's 2 local police officers just standing there, leaned up against a pickup truck. And they look at me, and I look at them, and then they look back at me more concerning, and I'm like, it's fine, I need a pair of gloves. And one of them reaches in his little thing, and he pulls out 2 pairs of gloves and hands them to me, and I walk back out. And I guess as soon as I walked back out, they just erupt hysterically, and John's like, yeah, he's always like that. I searched this car top to bottom, and as I'm searching this car is when I get the call from the guy. He's like, I'm going to see you tomorrow with the money for it. I'm like, okay. And so I drive the car back to the shop. I run it through a car wash because it had been sitting. And my friend who I paid to go scope the car out, who lived in the area, he's like, I know this car because he worked at the Audi dealership. The car was just then getting a full service done. So the money he owed on the car, he spent doing the full service instead of paying the car off. And then he just kind of forgot about paying the car off. So I get it back to one of our storage facilities and I back it in and it's all good. And then the guy's wife calls. Where's my car at? What? You mean my car? No, where's my car? I'm like, no, it's my car. And then she calls her husband and her husband calls me back and they're like, we'll be there. They didn't show up for 3 more weeks. The car sat collecting dust. I charged them a storage fee, a $600 repo fee to waste my time driving out there because I ain't a repo man. And I kind of pooped my pants doing some of this stuff. So we accept unique payment terms to sell people cars they can't normally afford, to make them happy in the long run, because they send their friends to us because we take anything on trade, any sort of credit. Oh, the one time I sat there counting out $22,000 for an hour. This is pre-money counter days. And then this second deal with this Audi's like, yeah, we need a money counter right now. And our inventory is pretty unique. We buy everything, and I love it. Myself, I'm a C4 fanatic, so I buy every low-mile C4 I can get. I love the C4 Corvette because it's one of the greatest Corvettes ever made, in my opinion. Back in the end of November, I did construction my entire life. And it got to the point where I'm tired of this. I'm about to be 30. So I quit and I bought a bunch of cars. I spent 30 grand in cars. I bought GTOs because those are cars that are on the up. I'd buy the cheapest ones in the country, fly out, drive it back, have an adventure, and I loved it. And then COVID hit, and I lost everything. I didn't really lose everything. I got back to where I was, what I started with, and my buddy saw that, and he's like, dude, I need help, just come work for me. And it's been a match made in heaven, because he lets me do whatever I want, I drive whatever I want. I have an open checkbook to buy whatever I want, as long as I can make money on it. And I've bought cars off of multiple friends, a lot of Cannonball guys. I bought cars off of Doug Tabbitt, stuff that he doesn't want to sell. It's been great. And I've made a lot of money doing it, and I love it. And the thing is, people say you find out your life in your 30s, and I think I pretty much figured out my life is wanting to be the biggest C4 Corvette wholesaler in the Midwest. I'm not someone that can walk into a main franchise dealership and sell cars that way. I like selling the cars that are rebuilt wrecks, polished turds, but I don't sell junk. When you're in the wholesale dealership, most of them start off as junk. You have to make them good cars to sell. And when you sell them, and we never have any issues, nobody comes back to us trying, oh, you sold me junk. They come back and buy more cars from us. And out of the 115 cars in my inventory currently, about 50 of them are for sale. The rest are out at shops getting rebuilt, getting body work done. Because I don't buy anything from auctions. Everything I buy comes from major dealerships. Because buying from auctions, you don't get quality. There's too much stuff out there. There's too many issues. The prices are going up. And right now, during the used car market, during this COVID, when all the manufacturers shut down for months, the used car market boomed. We were selling 37 cars a month, which is great numbers for a dealership like ours. And we're on the up and up. We're trying to grow and be the best we can be. We want to be 2 times what we are. By next year, I want to triple our size. And I got a feeling I can do it. And my buddies have faith in me and stuff. I don't think his brother does, but my boss has faith in me. And that's my repo story.
All 3 of our cars in the final, the RS3, the Viper, and the Porsche 911 Turbo, were fundamentally as fast as the 918. So in the final of Sorted, as you will be seeing, we unfortunately had to make some adjustments. The winner of the West Coast Regional was the Sheepy Race Audi R8. And for reasons I don't know personally, they did not want to make that car available to us for the final. And they did not want to make a similar replacement car available to us for the final. Even though they said extremely clearly in the regional, we called the dude up and we said, we are going to name you the winner of this, but if you can't come to the final, we're not going to have you win. It's a little more subjective, obviously, but you're making a television show. If the winner doesn't want to come to the next round, why make them the winner, right? So he said, no, if we're there, we're there. And then he fully ghosted us and was just like, no, and wouldn't make another car available. It was a nice car, I'm not gonna lie. That R8 was a nice car, it was a nice package. But they didn't do the thing they said they were gonna do and send it to the final. And we were paying to ship it. We have a shipping sponsor as well. East West Auto Transport is our shipping sponsor, and we were gonna ship it for free. But what we had to do for the final, what we decided to do, once the West Coast Regional winner was not available, was we got 2 cars back from the East Coast. We got the Calvo Viper and we got the ratified motorsport Audi RS3. Viper had a fuel pump issue, so it was making like 300 less horsepower than it should have. The RS3, when Tanner was lapping it, he thought the oil temp gauge was the water temp gauge. And so he went easier on it, thinking it was up overheating, and he just read the gauge wrong. Because he was literally getting in a car and like going, you know what I mean? So both of those cars we decided to bring back. And so we had a 3-way final with the Sissio 911 Turbo S, the Calvo Viper, and the ratified motorsport RS3. Then we brought along a Porsche 918 because the RS3 was claimed 900 wheel horsepower. The Porsche was 900 wheel horsepower, and the Viper was 1,800 wheel horsepower. So we brought up a Porsche 918 Spider, which is pretty cool. And Tanner was lapping that, which was very, very cool to watch. That thing was moving. Sissio brought out a 911 Turbo S. It was a 2017. It had his kit on it, which is like a bolt-on kit, basically. It's a turbo upgrade. It's what you would consider a mild turbo upgrade, an exhaust, intercoolers, like basics. But the 911 Turbo is already such a ridiculous performance machine that it doesn't take that much to get it really, really over the line. And in many ways, the drivability is virtually unchanged. This had an exhaust on it, but that was voluntary. It doesn't add performance. You can run this kit with a stock exhaust, which is very cool. And the 918 is the fastest car Porsche ever made from 6 years ago. The bottom line is you're talking about something that Porsche was selling for over $1 million, that still sells for over $1 million, and is just the heavy-hitting hypercar. You know, it's the part of the trio, right? The LaFerrari, the P1, the 918 was sort of the holy trinity of 2015, cars. And what is crazy is that it is possible, and in fact, I don't want to say easy, but systematic and reliable to get that kind of performance out of a depreciated 911 turbo. I mean, you get a 2017 911 turbo, I don't know, 150 grand, 160 grand. You throw one of Nathan's kits on it, 40, 45K. I'm guessing, I think it's about that. And now, I mean, you're talking about true world-beating performance. You're talking about, numbers that really, really, really would shock somebody, and with almost no reduction in drivability. In terms of like Porsche and an Audi and Lamborghini, when you modify their cars, really still retain a lot of drivability. The turbo R8s and Huracans, the big power Porsches, you can really just drive those cars around like normal cars. That's what I find to be so amazing, is actually not that you could take a car and make 1,100 horsepower, but that you could then commute in that car. And it's like not even really a thing. That's what's really crazy, because that's what 918 did. 918 took Le Mans car performance, right, and made it totally streetable. And you can do that now with their cars that are a step below. One of the reasons for this is that the mainstream exotics in the $200,000 to $250,000 range are actually, believe it or not, underpowered for their chassis capabilities. And this is for all kinds of reasons. It could be for fuel economy, it could be for emissions or noise, it could be just because they don't want to give it all or whatever. I mean, McLaren obviously has no problem selling death missiles, but everyone else is being a little more restrained about it. I have found in driving these cars that chassis-wise, there's a lot of room on the table there. A lot of room for more power at the high end. Now, if you took an STI and you tripled the horsepower, would you have to do a lot of supporting mods to that? Yes, you would. But you can take a 911 turbo and go 2.5 times the horsepower, and your cornering speed, on the road course is unaffected, other than having to manage heat in the brakes from the additional speed, other than having to manage heat in the engine from the additional power. Unaffected. Whereas if you make a car that is multiples of its power, and it wasn't that great of a handler to begin with, we're talking about Lamborghinis 911 turbos and Viper ACRs. These are not cars that suffer from handling issues. So by doubling their power, believe it or not, they can still get around a corner and they can still drive all right. Like my friend Nick at VF Engineering in LA, they make the superchargers for the R8s and the Huracans. Their kits are unbelievable. You just plop it on and that's it. And his philosophy is that he makes power in what he believes to bring the engine in line with the chassis, more in harmony. And when I've driven their builds, I find that to be accurate. But I think Sissio's car is like that too. Sissio's car, yes, 1,000 horsepower, 900 of the wheels. But you can modulate the throttle, right? Partial throttle is a thing. That's what you don't see in the home-tuned cars. All the home-built cars, home-tuned cars, full throttle tunes. You want that car to run right, idle, or flat. That's how you drive them. You try and do partial throttle in a corner, and it just loses it. That's the difference between a factory tune and a home tune. But the really good shops, they do partial throttle tuning as well. So Sissio's car was the best at the infield portion of it because you could actually modulate the throttle in the corners, as opposed to other cars where it was really a full throttle map. All three of our cars in the final, the RS3, the Viper, and the Porsche 911 Turbo, were fundamentally as fast as the 918. I mean, really, fundamentally just as fast in the ways that most people would consider to be important. from a roll, for instance. From a roll, that the Viper and the Porsche Turbo absolutely made mincemeat of the 918. And even the little RS3 was right there. I mean, the RS3 was the most impressive of all of them. It's MQB. You whittle that down enough, you're talking about a Golf. You know what I mean? It's a Golf with a different engine and gearbox and a better all-wheel drive system. Yes, it's an RS3. But the platform is Golf. That's where we're starting. We could even let's be generous. The platform's A3. I've driven the A3. It's terrible. The A3 is a piece of shit. The S3 and RS3 are nice, but the A3 sucks. To start with that and work your way up to something that really is within spitting distance of a 918, and in some metrics will beat it, is incredibly impressive. And Rat from Ratified Motorsport, his name Ratam. I believe he's Vietnamese, but he goes by Rat. Quiet, mild-mannered, car's just doing his thing, let the car speak for itself, not like loud like me, and here's this monster of a car that if you took it had graphics and shit off, but if you took the graphics off, it's a gray Audi. And woof! You know what I mean? Like, wow. I mean, really, it went really, really, really fast. What we are learning now is the performance potential of modifying a higher end car is very high if you do it wisely.
Last year, in early 2020, I bought a 2017 Audi R8 V10 Plus, and I bought the car for Car Trek 9, our show that's sponsored by Auto Tempest and the Ticket Clinic. And I also drove it for the Gold Rush Rally last year. We had a great time doing Car Trek. I drove it a lot personally. I wrapped it orange, my favorite color, and the car was wonderful. Maybe a little bit boring relative to an old Lambo or a Spiker or something like that, but if you were only going to have one exotic car, it's honestly hard to get much better. We also did kind of a competition back and forth with Sway about who could make the ultimate rally car. We'd put a Redenzo laser jamming and radar detector system in it, a police scanner, and Arnie and I drove it. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. Unfortunately, I also got a really bad ticket in the car, but the Ticket Clinic was able to help with that one, and so I appreciate them as always. But after I was done with the car around the end of last year, I was ready to sell it because I was just kind of bored with the car, and so I put it up for sale on Auto Tempest and everywhere else, and honestly, I just got almost no action on the car. I guess just as the crypto markets were kind of drying up, that $100,000 to $200,000 price point just wasn't quite as hot as it had been, in the prior 2, 3, 4 years. I could not sell the car, but I found a Ferrari GTC 4 Lusso that was for sale pretty cheap at a Buick dealer in Jackson, Mississippi, and so I worked out a deal with them, bought it for cheaper than any clean title car I'd ever sold for, and they gave me more than I'd paid for the R8. A wonderful deal. I was super happy, and I do still love and have the Lusso. This happens in January, so I drive out there, leave the title with them, everything's good, I drive back in the Lusso. But about a week later, I was contacted by a South Atlanta exotic car dealer, and I had known this guy very, very kind of in passing. I think I'd tried to buy an LP560 from him for Car Trek 1 back in 2020, but I didn't know him well, but I think I followed him on Instagram, and so he called when he saw my name on the title and said, I just bought your R8. So he was super excited about it for inventory, and I was excited to see where it ends up. That's kind of why we created the VINwiki app, so that you can follow along with your cars after you sell them and see what happens. And so this was just another way for me to do that. He told me that he was working some deals and it looked like he'd sold the car sometime in February. But about a month ago, I got contacted by another friend who I guess was trying to buy the car. And I said, I thought it was already sold. At the end of the day, it's really, really nice. The only thing that was wrong with it when I traded it in was that there was a lingering airbag light from a sensor underneath the passenger seat that was on just eternal back order from Audi. I had one on order. One of my mechanics had one on order. I know that this dealer mentioned that he was trying to get one as well. And so I know that the car probably still has an airbag light on, but it's not because of an airbag issue. It's a sensor. I think it's a great car to own. At this point, I think it had a little over 60,000 miles. I'd put about 5,000 miles for all the things that we had done. And again, a great car. A little high miles for an Audi, but I said, by all means, purchase it. He did not end up buying it, but again, following along on Instagram, I saw that the car had sold again in the middle of May to another local owner. So that's exciting. Again, I see what happens next in the history of the car. I was a little bit disappointed that it was no longer orange and they painted the really, really nice diamond polished wheels black, blacked out all the emblems and things like that. But hey, it's their car. It's on to its next life. Last Friday, just a few days ago, a knock on my door was my mailman with a certified letter that I had to sign for. So, oh, this should be fun. So I opened it up and it said that my vehicle had been abandoned. And it gave me these options of coming down there and paying, at the time it was like $890 in storage fees, or I could release my ownership so that they could auction it off, or they were going to try to lien the car so that then they could auction it off to recoup their towing and storage fees. And I'm like, what is this talking about? But it was about the R8. Now, of course, this was well out of my mind at this point, but I look at it, that is the VIN, it is the car that I own. And so I give them a call and I say, hey, what's going on? They said, well, we've had this car here. Y'all haven't come to pick it up. We know that you're the titled owner of the car, which was news to me because it had now gone through effectively 4 transactions that I could trace. So the Buick dealer to the South Atlanta dealer, them to their customer in February, getting it back somehow, and then selling it again in May. And so in less than 2 weeks, it's now impounded and abandoned. So I said, well, what's the situation with the car? Do you have the keys? Does it run? And they said, no, it was towed in here for an accident. I said, well, do you mind sending me some pictures of the current condition? And she was happy to do that. So she walks outside and texts me on her phone a few pictures of the car, and it is demolished. I mean, every side corner, the roof of this car is destroyed. My immediate text response was, oh my. And in fact, she responded, yes, I'm so glad they lived. And I said, well, I am too. So at least that's good news. And so I said, well, what do I need in order to get this car back? Because obviously I didn't have the title anymore. It wasn't really my car, but it didn't sound like anybody had a great path to liberate this car from its impounded state. And she said, well, you need the title or you need the registration. Now, my birthday's in October, so the registration was still current. I could not, digging through all my drawers, find a copy of it, but I went over to the DMV and they could reprint me one for $1. And so I had a copy of that. I sent her a picture of it. She said, yep, that's exactly what we need. Now, of course, this was late in the day on Friday. I said, all right, well, I'll go over on Monday and I'll pay. It was going to end up being a little over $1,200 in the storage fees and the tow fees and things like that to get the car out. Of course, what was I going to do with it? I mean, it's effectively a forklift to move R8 at this point. I said, well, would you guys mind towing it up to my friend's shop, to Cameron at DC Motorworks in Cumming? And he said, of course, we'd be happy to do that. And so I ended up paying them extra to tow it up there. And so I went down Monday, paid them in cash, their storage fees, and paid them to tow the car up. And on Tuesday morning, it shows up just to be pushed right off the flatbed in Cameron's lot. So I go over there, we're looking around this car, and man, it is destroyed. I'd only had a chance to walk around it very, very quickly when I saw it down in Peachtree City at the impound lot, and so I was excited to kind of be able to look deeper into it. And what it seems to have happened is that it hit a tree in the front right very, very hard, a very clear indention that I could actually stand in of where this car was damaged, and then it must have flipped up and hit, I don't know if the same tree, a different tree, on the roof. That shattered the deck lid and it just rolled around a bit. Supposedly, they said it was found on its side in the woods. Now, when I was down on Monday in Peachtree City paying off the storage fees, I asked them where they towed it in from. And they gave me an address that was about 15 minutes away. I said, well, I'm going to go check this out. And so the address was kind of right at this curve in a backcountry road. And there was a little bit of a bridge that maybe could have unsettled a car. But I mean, the R8 understeers an awful lot. It's a very stable car. Obviously, it goes really, really fast, but it's, I mean, in terms of safe and easy to control supercars, it's about as good as it gets. At the address where they said they had picked it up, I did not see any skid marks, no evidence that a car had like swerved or anything like that. I didn't understand how a car could have gotten destroyed to this extent in that location. So of course I'm curious, but at the end of the day, I'm just going to make sure that they're not auctioning this car off and I get to play around with it for a few days, buying it back for $1,200, always expecting that an owner or an insurance company is going to come looking for it. And of course, at that point, I'll be happy to let them have it. Now, that did not take as long as I thought it might, because Tuesday afternoon, I got a phone call from this dealer that I knew had sold the car. And I was going to call him in the next couple of days anyway, as we got to kind of look through the car and see what the real state of affairs was. But he said, hey, I just talked to the tow yard in Peachtree City on behalf of my client, and apparently you picked the car up. I said, I sure did. I was going to call you about it. Ultimately, they didn't have a path to ownership for anybody else. I guess you hadn't processed the title yet. Not that big of a deal. He was still well within the 30 days he had to do so. But when I also looked at the Georgia DMV system as to who the current registered owner was, they don't give you personally identifying information, but they do tell when the registration was renewed, and they say when the insurance was added to the car. This is so you can make sure the insurance is in place so that you can go and process your title in person. But it was done on the 5th. So again, car was sold on May 18th, crashed on June 3rd, and on June 5th, 2 days later, the insurance is added to the car. Now in Georgia, like most states, within the first 30 days after you buy a car, your existing insurance has to cover that car. Now, I don't know what would happen if you had insurance on a Honda and you go crash a Bugatti, but that can become a little bit complicated. But I've known people to file claims in exactly that circumstance. And so I assumed that's what was going to be going on. But regardless, he had contacted me. I told him exactly where the car was. I said, you guys can pick it up at any point. I just wanted to make sure that the remains of this R8 did not get auctioned off. And so he said, all right, well, let me get in touch with the owner, see exactly what he wants to do. I don't know why he hadn't gone over to the tow yard to figure out what to do with this car. Apparently he has not filed an insurance claim yet. There was a lot of really, really strange and suspicious things. So of course I asked him, do you know anything about the accident? Because I mean, this thing is horrific. He said, well, the guy kind of showed me a video of the car being towed out of the woods, and I guess he had to climb out with his passenger through one of the doors vertically to get out of the car. He said also, this guy had a prosthetic leg, which I guess it freaked him out a little bit on the initial test drive of the car, but he had to get back into the car to get his leg. Now, I don't know if this prosthetic leg fell off before said crash or during or after, whatever, but at the end of the day, guy has one leg. He ends up buying my R8, and he'd been driving it as his dream car. I guess his wife was really fond of it too. I knew they were both kind of on the paperwork that when the car had been towed in, but apparently there were no injuries. Now, what the story was from the owner, the guy who had bought the car, to the dealer was that somebody had kind of veered into his lane and he had to swerve off the road to avoid him. Again, in most cases, that would have resulted in some braking and some skid marks, which I did not see. I don't know if it was just late at night and he lost control. That doesn't really matter. But clearly, he was very fortunate to not have a worse outcome in this crash. And so I said, great, feel free to pass along my number. I'll give you the number for Cameron up at DC Motor Works. They can come get the car whenever. I just wanted to make sure there were no more storage fees accruing. And quite honestly, I just wanted to meddle around enough to be able to tell another fun story and know more about the history of my car after I had sold it. So they were grateful that I'd been able to, avoid an auction circumstance where the car went away. And again, he was confused as to why there hadn't been any insurance activity or any other intervention in the car. But, he said they had performed a field sobriety test and things, but again, a one-legged man, it's hard to, I don't know. It was a weird circumstance, which tends to happen with my weird, strange history cars. A couple hours later, I do get a call from the owner, and he was a little bit confused as to how they'd even let me have it. I explained why that happened and why it was now very important that they go ahead and process the title, and he understood that, and I told him where the car was. He said he was going to send a flatbed up. He reimbursed me for the storage fees that I'd paid and things like that. And so, I don't know exactly what happened in this accident. It was definitely as bad as I have seen a car damaged with no injuries. However, when we got the car up to Cameron's and we were looking around, there's definitely some DNA evidence on the passenger side curtain airbag that came out. So, both of the windows were broken out of the car. All the glass is broken. The windshield was so shattered, it's unbelievable. But there definitely somebody had a little bit of an injury, but at the end of the day, everybody's okay. The car was supposedly insured at the time. I guess we'll find that out later. But the R8 is not going to be going back on the road anytime soon. Maybe the powertrain is salvageable. Honestly, the only thing that was in perfect shape was the carbon fiber wing that all the pluses have, and you could sell that immediately. So amazing that the most desirable part for anybody to buy out of a salvage car is in perfect shape. But that's for them to do. They've gotten it picked up. It's headed back to South Atlanta to do whatever it does. And at least now I know what happened to my R8.
That's when I found out he was a doctor. And certainly, judging from the size of him, not one that I'd want a prostate exam from. Yeah, so I've worked at quite a few dealerships in my time. I really enjoyed, I think, working at Audi the most. I really bonded the most with the brand, and to this day, I actually own 3 Audis. So it's the brand that I've really enjoyed the most. It's really fit my lifestyle and my area the best. Audi was a really enlightening experience for me, coming from a Jeep dealership where it was basically no holds bar, see 10 people a day, throw people out that had bad credit, do silly things to people, and just overall debauchery that just still haunts me to this day. Whereas Audi, you treated people with respect and care. And later on, going to Porsche, same thing. You treated people like they should have been treated. Once I was working at Audi for a while, I started getting referrals, as most people typically do. And on one particular occasion, a friend of mine who owns a local performance shop said that a friend of his wanted to come in and test drive an RS7. Called him up, set up an appointment on a Saturday, and went about my week. Guy showed up on Saturday. And unfortunately for me, it was a very busy Saturday, so I didn't have time to go gas up the car before he had gotten there. So we hop in the car, I grab a gas card to fill up, go over, we fill the car up, which is, the gas station is off our normal test drive route on a highway, which we would normally do mostly in town for that dealership. Once we got back onto the highway, we made a quick U-turn to come back to the dealership, and the on-ramp was straight for about 200 feet, then made a 90-degree left, and then made a 90-degree right where it was parallel with the highway. He decides to make the left and immediately floors it. And it was an unusually warm November day, which contributed to this because there were still leaves on the ground. And because of the quick temperature change, those leaves were fairly wet. On his quick acceleration, he approached the turn way too quickly. And one of the major downfalls with Audis in general is that they are front-engined, meaning the engine is in front of the front axle center line. It makes the cars have a tendency to understeer, which the Quattro seems to balance out pretty well if you have the balls to floor it in a turn instead of getting nervous and hitting the brakes. Well, he wasn't that good of a driver. And before I could say, don't do that, I felt the brakes engage. And at that point, I knew we were toast. We smashed right front into the curb and guardrail, and then the right back swung around and also smashed into the guardrail, and we slid to an unceremonious stop. I was in the back seat. All I could think about was, well, I guess I better dust off my resume. I hopped out of the car. I asked him if he was okay. His son was in the front. He was okay as well. I walked around the car and was faced with the wheels pointed like this, and knew immediately that this car was not going to make it back to the dealership. And I had to make the unfortunate phone call to my general manager that the car was, for lack of a better term, up. So my GM shows up with a large A8 and asks what happened. And the customer kept saying, oh, I think the traction control was off. Well, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, the traction control was certainly on. The car was in dynamic mode, but that does not disable traction control in any sort of way. He just was a terrible driver. We ended up getting the car loaded up onto a tow truck. We got a ride back to the dealership, and I kept my job for that period of time at least. So in the ensuing days, the gentleman kept calling me, asking me, well, did you turn off the traction control? I could have sworn the traction control was off. And I kept having to tell him, no, the traction control was on. And unfortunately, due to the negative handling characteristics of the RS7, he declined to purchase it. The car had about $15,000 in damage. It smashed every single carbon fiber piece that wrapped around to the right side of the car. So on the RS7, that particular car had carbon optic. I don't know if it had carbon mirrors, so those might have been gotten out unscathed. But it destroyed the front bumper, the carbon inlet on the front bumper. It destroyed the front fender. I think it got the headlight too. Both right side doors, and the rear quarter, the rear bumper, and the rear diffuser. Obviously both wheels, a steering knuckle. It was about $15,000 in damage. I know that after I left, this is the funniest part of this story, is after I left, they obviously fixed the car and had to sell it with a disclosure that it had a bad Carfax. Well, somebody had the bright idea to sell it and not disclose the Carfax. So the new owner found out about it about 2 weeks later when he brought it back in for a complaint that the trunk was misaligned and not closing correctly. And needless to say, they had to buy the car back again and then resell it with a proper disclosure. So in many states, you have to sign a liability waiver to test drive a vehicle. In New Jersey, you don't. And what you would expect is that the customer's insurance would take responsibility for this. But in fact, in New Jersey, the dealer's insurance took care of it and fixed the car. Another great story I have from Audi. So I had a guy come in that wanted an A6 3-liter. And at the time, they were about to change the body style on the A6 3-liter. And it took me quite a lot of effort to sell him a pre-facelifted A6 3-liter. Once we were done with the test drive, the guy's looking around the car and he rubs the headliner and he's looking at it. And I say to him, well, I said, isn't it nice? I said, this car has a no-cost option of a black headliner. Normally, they're gray. And he goes, I hate it. I have to have a light gray headliner. And the kicker was he had to have a white car with a brown interior. Well, there was a white car with a brown interior and a black headliner 2 miles away at the competing Audi dealership, which would have happily swapped us for this car, or one with a light gray headliner that was in Vermont. And I am in northern New Jersey, which is about 150 miles away. After much trying to get the gentleman into a black headliner car, we eventually conceded and said, hey, we'll swap in this gray headliner car. We call up the dealership that has the car, and it takes a little while for them to get back to us, but they finally get back to us and tell us, hey, we swapped this in long distance as well, and we drove the car. So the car has about 150 to 200 miles on it already. And we were planning on driving the car with a swap driver back to us as well, which would have meant another 150, 200 miles. So my sales manager says, hey, why don't you call the guy and confirm that this is all okay? And I said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. So I go to call the customer, and the GM of the dealership walks over and goes, don't tell him, just tell him we're getting the car swapped. And I go, are you sure? Yeah. Hello? Hey, just want to let you know that your car has been secured. We'll have it in 4 to 5 days. Okay, great. Thank you. So car gets swapped in, and it has approximately 350 miles on it. Something that even the average person would go, I don't know if I want that as a new car. Gentleman comes in, looks at the car, everything goes off without a hitch until I call insurance. He had Geico, and Geico, of course, asks, well, how many miles are on the car? And I go, 350 or 80, whatever were on the car. And he goes, excuse me? I go, yeah, the car has a little bit of mileage from being swapped in. He goes, put the phone down. And he proceeded to lose it in the dealership. We eventually calmed him down. We threw in a free maintenance plan, and he was leasing the car anyway, so the mileage impact was negligible, but he kept saying that it was the feel of a new car that was driving him insane. But in the end, he took the car, he was a happy customer, and he walked away with free maintenance for 3 years, so he walked away happy. Further along at my tenure at Audi, I had a woman come in that had a Toyota Prius C, which is the little subcompact, even more miserable to drive variant of a Prius. And she came in to trade it in on an Audi A3. When sitting with her, she was a very hard to deal with person. We went through test driving, negotiating, and we got to the point where I had to value her trade. Put in all the information, mileage, etc. that she had told me, and asked her for her keys, asked her if she had had any accidents. She said to me that she had not. And Carfax showed clean, so I said, okay, give me the keys. Let me take a wander out, take a peek at what you got. Go to wander out. In front of the car looks fine. I wander around to the back, and the back end is positively demolished. Quarter panel, tailgate, bumper, taillight, gone. To the point where somebody should have put the red tape over the taillights. So I look at the car, I take photos to put into our dealership software, take down the exact mileage, and walk back inside, give her a number on the car, to which she objects profusely. And I said to her, well, ma'am, you told me that the car was accident-free and the whole back end is demolished, for lack of a better term. And she said, well, I didn't have any accident. I just backed into my retaining wall at my house. And I looked at her completely deadpan and went, ma'am, did you back into the retaining wall intentionally? And of course, her jaw hit the table. And I said, that's why they call them accidents. It's okay, it happens, but it's an accident. We ended up making a deal, and she left happy in her new A3, and we were now owning one slightly smashed Prius C. So after I worked at Audi for a while, I did what every Audi enthusiast likes to do and decided to step it up to Porsche, the brand that has made the same car for 60 years. Once I got to Porsche, the clientele was a little bit different, more affluent, a little bit more laid back, really buying a pleasure vehicle more than anything. While we did sell a lot of Macans that were daily drivers, they were really more attainable dream cars for people that really wanted to get that Porsche that they had always wanted. On one particular day, I'm sitting around sipping on my tea at 9:30 in the morning, as does every Porsche salesperson from the hours of 9 to 10 instead of doing actual work. And I see a gentleman stroll into the showroom wearing a torn corduroy shirt, sweatpants that were so badly torn at the pocket that I could see the color of his underwear, Crocs, and a hairstyle that would be best described as the abominable snowman from Looney Tunes. He also was about 6'7" and the better part of 350 pounds. Not a small guy. And of course, he's looking at a 911, and I figured, well, either he's homeless or he's well enough off where he doesn't care what he wears. And it's Porsche. We're in the middle of a highway, so I figured probably the latter and went over to talk to him. And we started talking. He was interested in a new 911. And he explained that he had his old one in for service and was just waiting for a loaner. So we wandered back up to the service area so that I could get more information on his trade. And that's when I found out he was a doctor. And certainly, judging from the size of him, not one that I'd want a prostate exam from. We decided to meet up later in the evening to test drive the vehicle. So at the time, we only had one 911 4S coupe, and it was on the showroom floor. Unfortunately, I got a little tied up later in the day, didn't get a chance to pull it out of the showroom. So when he showed up around 7 o'clock, pulled it off the showroom floor, and the gas gauge showed about 20 miles to empty. So I figured, we're fine for a 5-mile test drive. Boy, was I wrong. We go out on our test drive, we get off the highway, we're going through some nice back roads by the dealership, and all of a sudden the car loses power. And he's giving it gas, and he's going, I think we ran out of gas. And I look, and the distance to empty still says 15 miles to empty. And we coast to a stop silently. I call up my manager, and he says, no problem, we'll get a flatbed, let me come and pick him up. So he swings by, grabs the customer, whisks him back off to the dealership while I'm left to stand with a $130,000 broken car. So as I'm standing there, I'm in front of a house. Guy wanders out of his house and goes, everything okay? I go, yeah, I think I ran out of gas. He goes, oh, I got a gas can in the garage. Gives me gas, refuses to take money from me. Car fires right up. Drive it right back to the dealership. We do another test drive after I filled the tank. And what I discovered that day was that the 4S models of the 991 911 obviously have a hump in the tank. Well, when they say 15 miles to empty, they really mean negative 15 miles to empty because you are out of gas at that point. The happy ending to this story is we went out on a successful test drive and I ended up selling him his dream car.
And she kind of just has this look like, I got pulled over yesterday and I'm not helping these guys. Back at the beginning of COVID, I've always had a dream of taking the Cannonball record, which many people do. And, you know, there's a guy here right now in this room that happened to take it a couple years back. And, you know, right when COVID was occurring, I think I was probably one of the first ones to attempt the COVID record. I decided I'm just going to do this whole thing completely cold turkey in my R8 that gets 8 miles to the gallon at best at speed, most of the time 5. And I was like, I just want to see if I can take this record by just driving, you know, crazy. So my fiance and me drive up to New York the night before, wake up the next morning, and I'm like, okay, I feel refreshed. I feel ready to go. So we go and get a bagel, and I hop in the car with a bunch of 5-hour energies. So I'm driving, you know, across the country, and, you know, the first couple, like coming out of Lincoln Tunnel, I remember, you know, Ed had sent me a message saying like this, or somebody in the group chat, because you have basically all the former Cannonball people verifying it with an app that you put on your phone, and they can watch as you move across the country to make sure it's real and everything else. They're like, oh, you're doing really well coming out. Like, this is the fastest we've ever seen anyone come out of New York. And, again, this was the first COVID record, or a record attempt. That's good. It's a good sign. I'm off to a good start. I've never tried before. I did literally no preparation. I mean, the car was stock. My goal was to do it solo, break the record under 24 hours if possible, but really just breaking the record, and to just do it completely unprepped and nothing but Waze and just my radar detector, and just go. And I mean, my thought process was pretty simple, and I followed through on it. Just don't stop, and just pretty much drive until there's nothing left in the tank, and then pull in, do as quick as a gas stop as I can. I use this software called iExit. It's really convenient because it tells you like if the gas station's 1 mile off the exit or like a tenth of the mile off the exit. I spent most of the time listening to music or talking on the phone with random people, because when I'm driving, I just like to chat with people. So I'll just call people on the phone and waste an hour and a half of my time, and it makes the drive seem like it's nothing because you're always talking with somebody about literally anything. The other key to my, cannonballing is just the copious amounts of cigars that I just puff away on. I smoke at least 6 or 7 cigars a day. It's really hard to go to sleep when you smoke a cigar or have just finished a cigar. It's like impossible. Like the nicotine just is surging through you, and it's just like I can't sleep at all. So as I drive through Pennsylvania, it's 3 p.m., 4 p.m., onward across this trip, and I get to around 9 p.m., and I've passed by a few cops at this point, and my theory proved true. I would pass them at 150, 160 miles an hour, which was what was required to kind of take this record. And then they actually just wouldn't do anything. I don't know if they were scared of getting COVID, or if they were just like, that's way too fast. I'll never catch that guy. I'm not going to do it. So it's getting a little bit later, 9 or 10 p.m., about halfway across the country. According to a certain Cannonball person, I was a little bit behind, but not horribly so. And I was told that the West Coast is where you start to slow down. But in my long cross-country drives, that's where I tend to speed up. The thing with that record, too, that was difficult for me was the truckers, they were doing these like side-by-sides where they wouldn't move because they had pretty much suspended all the traffic laws for them, to keep the country moving and get everyone to masks. So they would just sit there in the left lane, cruise along, and you'd be stuck behind them. So I'm in Missouri, and I, pass by St. Louis, and things seem to be going fine. I'm, starting to get into darkness, and the speed's starting to increase. I'm probably in the 160 to 170, and, I'm realizing that around 164, 165, the gas mileage really starts to tumble on the R8 for some reason. And I'm probably about an hour outside in central Missouri, and I see a cop on an overpass, and I'm at about 160. I have 50 miles left on my tank, and I'm like, okay, I have to bring up the speed. Like, this guy's chasing after me, right? Turns his lights on, comes down this overpass, roaring, like he is coming. And I'm like, all right, here we go. I'm like, I'm probably going to get arrested, but let's see how this goes, because I got 50 miles, so I can pick, I have some exits to pick from to fuel up, and I want to get as much distance as I can. I'll be far enough to get gas, 5-10 minutes, get back in the car, and then bring them on an additional chase if they send cops out, and just keep going until I get to the next state, which is only like 150 miles away, which is, basically a tank of fuel in the R8. So I just keep accelerating, and I bring it up to 180, 190. I notice that, okay, realistically now with the gas I'm burning through, I'm going to have 30 or 40 miles. As I'm cruising, I lose the cop in maybe a minute. Like, you can't see him anymore, and I never saw him again. But then I pass a second cop that's sitting in the median, who immediately rips out, starts chasing me. Lose him. Then I see a third cop. As I'm getting closer to the exit, I maybe have 10 miles left on my tank. I'm like, I have to go to this exit. I can't make it one more exit past. I text my fiance who's in the air. I'm like, I'm probably going to jail. Like, we'll see how this plays out, but I saw the last cop like 5 minutes ago or 4 minutes ago, and it's just a little too recent to feel comfortable. I have to get gas. There's no other way. And this is, I mean, the one problem with not having a fuel tank, but it's also kind of luck, right? Because your fuel tank could have been near empty too if you had, a fuel cell or something like that. So, part of Cannonball, I think at this point is somewhat luck. Like, did you get into a wild police chase or not? So I pull off the exit and I made a decision. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to pull into this gas station, put the car on the side of the gas station, walk inside, and just get a snack and give it 2 or 3 minutes to see if anyone shows up. So I'm very leisurely. I'm kind of picking pistachios or peanuts or whatever. Decided to go with the peanuts. I'm talking with the lady at the counter. She's like, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "DC." I'm doing a little drive across the country, and she kind of had this look, and she's like, "Well, they're a little crazy out here, the cops," right? And I look to my left, and I see 3 cops around my car. And she kind of just has this look like, I got pulled over yesterday, and I'm not helping these guys, right? And I'm like, more luck. So I'm like, well, there goes that. And I look around, and I'm like, there's a Hampton Inn. I see like another gas station, some other stuff. So I've parked the car on the side. I walked in the side door of the gas station, and I walk out the front door, and I'm standing there eating my peanuts, looking at the cops to my left with 3 cops around the car. A kid's like taking a photo with the car, right? And I just go on my phone, call an Uber, go on a Hilton app, and reserve the Hampton Inn across the street, get a room, check into it through the app. And I'm like, this is a good position. Like, I can just play like stupid. Like, I was just here getting peanuts. I'm staying at that Hampton Inn. Here's my reservation. Like, I don't know. I didn't see that guy come in. It's been here for a couple minutes or a couple hours. I don't know. But they never came up to me. They stood surrounding the car, just staring out into the, waiting for the owner to return. So the Uber comes. I get in the Uber, ride to the Hampton Inn, which overlooks the car. So I'm sitting in this random hotel in central Missouri at a Hampton Inn with no anything. Like, it's just me. I have no bags, no nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, either they're going to tow the car or what are they going to do? We're in a better position than we were 3 minutes ago, but the Cannonball run record is not going to be happening today because at this point, we're 45 minutes or an hour into this escapade. At this point, it's just worth it to quit and see what I can do to salvage, the car and its situation and, if they're going to tow it. So I'm watching out my window and I watch a tow truck pull up to the car, right? This guy gets out of the tow truck. It's one of those like swingy arm ones on the back where it's not like a flatbed. And he's talking with the cops and he's shaking his head. And I can imagine the conversation goes something like, I don't want the liability for jacking this R8 up. I've, probably never seen one of these in that town before or wherever I was. It didn't seem like a particularly affluent area, but it was a college town. So I just get the sense that the tow truck driver was like, I don't want to end up with some $10,000 bumper bill to help these guys out. So he leaves. And the cops kind of stay there for a little bit while longer. And then one by one, they leave. Now the car's alone in the lot. And I'm like, I really don't think it's a good idea to go get back in this car. Like, I have 150 miles that way or 150 miles that way to get clear. They're still looking for a wrapped Lux Rally card. But I'm like, they're clearly waiting on me. I'm not going to mess with this. So I call my friend Jovian, who calls a friend of his in Missouri who happens to own a wedding, a wedding hall and has a bunch of trailers and other stuff on his property. So he asked me to do a shout out if I ever told this story. So I recommend Sunset Bluffs. It's a great wedding venue if you're looking to get married. And I mean, he's a great car guy who was really willing to go out of his way at 1 a.m. to empty out his trailer and drive out to me in central Missouri, which was about an hour and a half drive for him. Load the R8 in, and I was like, here's what I want you to tell him. Like, if anyone comes up to you, just say some LLC. And I gave him the name of the LLC, said to come pick this car up. They gave us the, we had a spare key or something, and you're just the truck driver and you don't know anything about anything, right? And he's like, okay, I got this. So he pulls up, to the Hampton Inn. I give him the key. He loops around, goes to the gas station across the street, loads the car up, then goes and picks me back up. Right. So now I'm in this car. It's an enclosed trailer. I'm in his or truck, right? We have the enclosed trailer with the R8 behind us, and we just close it up. I get in the car, look around, there's no one around, and we get back on the highway, drive to St. Louis, right? I get on a flight, literally a 6 a.m. flight, because now it's like 4 or 5 in the morning by the time he came out and we went back. And so I'm like, okay, there's a 6 a.m. flight out of St. Louis. So I get to the airport, and of course it's COVID. So like right in the start. So I go to get on this plane, and there's 5 people on this plane to DC. 2 of them are congressmen. So we're all chatting. Oh, what are you doing in St. Louis? Or what are you doing here? And I'm like, I was here attempting a cannonball run. And you know what? It was funny. The congressmen were like, that's amazing. And they're like, tell us more about what you were doing and how you ended up. They're like, well, you didn't make it clearly because you're only halfway here. I'm like, well, yeah, here's what happened. Tell them the whole story. They're like, that's crazy. It was a fun little flight home, a fun little night out. And it taught me that really I just need to make sure my average is at 160 and, which actually will put your average at 108 or 110 or whatever the current attempt to take the record is. But I was probably at 104 or 105, which at that time was pretty close to taking it. And I really wanted to take it solo, cold turkey, because I want to change their record a little bit in that I want to make sure everyone has to do it solo and stay up for the 24 hours or 27 hours just to make the bar a little bit higher for everybody. So I'll try again at some point. I won't discuss when, but it will definitely happen again.
Did you check the speed camera network when you first started this investigation, which would have been 4 or 5 months after the alleged crimes? She goes, yes. The detective who's just said no to the judge is now shrinking by the minute into his chair. In June 2018, there was a lot of publicity, newspapers, radio, about an alleged drive from John O'Groats to Land's End, and that I was responsible for setting the record from John O'Groats to Land's End in 9 hours and 36 minutes. I was then arrested, the car taken off me, a lot of my property was seized, and then I was released pending investigation. While I was released pending investigation, I went over and did the C2C Express in a 1974 right-hand drive Jag that we shipped over, and had an amazing experience, and just fantastic. Just met all these friends and it was just brilliant. And then when we came home, I had a very big envelope arrive. Bearing in mind, it's been probably 1.5 years now since my arrest. I've been charged with 6 counts. The first 3 are dangerous driving. 1 for dangerous driving with an unauthorized fuel cell. Dangerous driving on roads within the United Kingdom. Another dangerous driving within roads of the United Kingdom, to sort of double it up. The 4th one was perverting the course of justice by using electronic equipment to evade speed cameras. Then there was the 5th one, which was perverting the course of justice for using fraudulent number plates to evade speed cameras. And then the final 6th one was using a fraudulent number plate from my home, ironically. So they make me drive all the way down there to plead not guilty. So you plead not guilty at the magistrates first, and then they'll take it to Crown Court, because these charges can't be dealt at magistrate level. They have to go upstairs, as they say. So that Christmas was quite a sober Christmas there, because it's happening. Thought it would get brushed under the carpet, that there'd be no further action. No, there's going to be a lot of further action. So it's January sort of 2020 now, and it's my first sort of hearing at Crown Court. Now this is very frightening, really, because it is how you'd imagine it in the UK. The judges wear the big wigs, the red robes. They put them very, very high up. That the courtroom's very sort of old and mahogany, and it's all quite serious. And there's so much ceremony and sort of pompousness, and it's very sort of as you'd imagine. These are the courts that do, terrorism, murder, the most despicable crimes. This is the highest court in the land. In fact, the court next to us, there's only 2 courtrooms, is a murder case. So we're there, and I have to now plead guilty or not guilty to the charges in front of the Crown Court judge. So I'm in this glass dock with 2 security guards. The prosecution are down there. And the judge is a long way away, but I can clearly see he's looking directly in my eyes. And he says to me, if you are found guilty of these charges, there will be grave consequences. Now, I already knew there was going to be grave consequences because the charges I was facing, perverting the course of justice, it can be life, depending on the circumstances. My barrister friend and stuff was saying, look, these charges, I'll be real with you could be looking at anything between 3 and 6 years behind prison. And you're like, that doesn't sound like a lot, right? But it is when you've got to do that time. My wife was pregnant, heavily pregnant at the time, and then COVID hit. And as we all know, the world started to shut down, including the courts. They were closing the courts for the first time ever. And this had massive repercussions. I think this can only be a good thing, right? There's a backlog of cases building up. They're going to look through them and they're going to go, this is a silly case. Let's just get rid, right? We've got murderers to deal with. That did not happen. So in around sort of June time was the first time we were allowed back into the courts. At that point, we've been served the evidence, we've given a defense statement in, and we're fighting this, right? Their cases doesn't really make sense. And we have an admissibility hearing with the judge. This is a new judge that's come in. The old judge wanted to hang me. You could just tell he was ready to just don't waste time with the trial. Let's go straight to the hanging. But this new judge is looking at it, and he's looking at it with fresh eyes. And we have an admissibility hearing on key bits of evidence. Now, in the press, there was a 9-second piece of video of me driving my car in the top of Scotland past a police car, right? They were saying it's from the day of this alleged record run. And I was like, I've been to Scotland loads of times in that car. How can you say it's from that day? Well, the police car we passed, they'd managed to find the police officers who were sat in that car. We're like, oh, okay. So we look at the statements, and both the officers write statements in the top of Scotland. I don't know how they found them. And they go, we were there on the day doing speed enforcement. I'm like, okay, this isn't looking too good. We have no recollection of any Audi S5 passengers that day. So they say, well, maybe they missed it. And we go, well, how often do they park there, right? This video could be from any day. We do a freedom information request. Turns out the police park there daily. And we're like, it's from a different day. So we're arguing this in front of the judge. And the judge says, well, how can you say it's from the day? Well, what's the relevance of this video? And the prosecutor says to the judge, well, there's beeping in the car, my lord. The judge goes, well, could be a microwave for all you know. And the prosecutor's like, well, I doubt it would be a microwave. And he goes, let me stop you there. I go to the Nürburgring twice a year. I have radar and speed camera detectors in my car. If it's not from the day, it's not relevant, and I'm ruling it inadmissible. And just draws a line through it like that. Of all the judges in the land, I've got one that goes to the Nürburgring twice a year, right? So my barrister, who was sort of representing me at that time, a friend of the family, sort of said, will you be reserving this case to yourself? Because, we need this judge. We need the Nürburgring judge. And the judge leans back on his chair and he rubs his shoulders and he looks at me and he goes, yes, I will reserve this case to myself. And that was the moment where we thought, there's a fighting chance here. We're going to get a fair shake. Because up until that point, it was just like, we're just marching me off to the gallows. So that was a good day. And we realised then, right, we're going to have a fighting chance here. The prosecution are really scrambling now to try and get this case to go through because they've argued and fought for this case and they've spent so much money on it. It's like, we have to get a conviction here. We can't drop it now. So much money's been spent and arguing it through with the COVID and everything like that. It's like we have to get a result. So things push on now. We're sort of moving into October and a trial date set for December. So it's the start of December 2020. And at this point I've gone, right, we're getting very technical here. We've had experts brought in. We've got a GPS expert, speed camera expert, ex-police. They're all writing reports. Paperwork is building up. So the prosecution's case, they had cell phone evidence. So they tracked a cell phone that was registered to me at the top of Scotland at around 8 o'clock. And it was plotting down, connecting to the masts through the top of Scotland down towards the middle of England. And then it disappears for the English side of the trip and then appears attached to a mast near Land's End at around the time that this alleged time would be sort of there. There was also a GPS tracker that had tracked the alleged vehicle. So every 15 seconds, it was given a speed and location all the way down. Now, they'd had warrants and subpoenas or whatever they're called to access my bank details. That's how they found the GPS. That's how they found my cell phone data. And they're plotting this all on a map. So it's like, right, well, we need GPS experts and cell site experts and speed camera experts. So the guys we found, awesome guys, they come in and they're looking at it and they go, this is the ropiest case I've ever had to deal with. They're just basing it on a printout. Like this spreadsheet could have just been made and printed out. It's just an Excel. Where's the data handling? Where's all the certification with it all? And the prosecution are like, it is what it is, right? So we start looking at it and cross-referencing it. And what we start to see is the speed cameras, there's 105 speed cameras from the top of the country to the bottom. The A9 has the second longest average speed camera section in the world, about 115 miles, and that's an average speed. So you enter it, you have to stay below the speed limit for that 115 miles, otherwise there'll be a picture taken. And then the other ones are fixed Haydex speed cameras. You know, you can't jam them, you can't interfere with them. If a pigeon flies through quick enough, they're going to be activated. And they're on the motorway, and they're calibrated within an inch of their life, home office type approval, the highest standard in the world. And there's no activations, there's no images of a car going through the country. So the GPS data, we're looking at it and we're cross-referencing it with the speed camera, and the GPS, if you're to believe it, as the prosecution are saying speeds of 130, 140 through the middle of England on the highway, past these cameras. And you can go down to the detail of going, unless that car can brake quicker than a Formula One car and accelerate quicker than a Formula One car, it's doing 130, 140 through these speed cameras. And then the average speed cameras in the top of Scotland, well, it's saying it's averaged nearly 90 odd mile, 92 mile an hour through a 50. There's this sort of thing where we're going, well, are they just going to drop these speed camera activations? Do they have them? Well, what's going on here? So they're sort of skirting around the subject a little bit. Our experts are saying, well, I would trust the speed camera network in the UK over this $15 a month GPS tracker. But the prosecution are heavily relying on this. They're going, this is it. It doesn't put anyone behind the wheel of this car, whichever car it is, but they're saying this is proving the speed, it's dangerous. So we end up in this situation where we walk into sort of the trial, and both experts for the prosecution and for the defense have said, right, this is agreed. Nothing can interfere with those speed cameras. If a vehicle is in excess of the speed limit at that time, there will be an activation. Now, if the number plate's missing, dirty, it gets sidetracked for human review, so it's not automated, for a human to look through these to go, oh, it's a dirty plate, or the AI system's not quite read it properly. They're all in agreement of this, and yet we're kind of like, can you not see the conundrum you've got here? You're saying the car's doing this sort of speeds through the country past these cameras, but you've got no evidence from the cameras. So the expert is sort of saying, well, they didn't check them in time. They'll only store them for, say, 2 years. And after 2 years, they'll get deleted. So he's put this in his report, and we're like, well, bring this letter out. And it's from the chief of police saying, we have checked the speed cameras 6 months after they heard about it, which would have been 6 months after the alleged crimes had happened, and there was no activations. So we're in this situation now where we walk into trial, and we need to get an answer from the prosecution categoric. Are they saying they checked the cameras and there was no activations, or are they saying they checked the cameras too late and there was no activations? So we walk into trial, and the first thing before the jury got in is, and kind of housekeeping, and I'm now representing myself. Now, represent yourself at Crown Court is quite rare. In fact, when we looked it up, the Department of Justice have a little bit of guidance for judges and prosecutors on how to deal with litigant in persons, how they call it. And it's basically just saying that usually they have some sort of mental illness. And that was the only advice we had, was that if he represents himself, there's usually some sort of mental illness. So we're there, we stand up, the judge is there, it's all very ceremonial now, and it's like, this is it. It's been 2.5 years pretty much to this point. It's just all we've been thinking about. So we asked the judge, can we get a categoric answer? Has the prosecution and the police searched the speed camera network in the UK? And the detective who had taken over from another detective stands up in the court and says, we have not. And the judge goes, well, there you go, that's the answer. And I'm like raging about this. I'm like, whoa, hang on, they can't proceed to trial on there's no evidence because we didn't check, but there could have been if we'd have checked it. No evidence is no evidence, right? So this doesn't go down well with the judge. So it's the first impression, and the judge is like, I will not be undermined in this court, banging the gavel. My buddy who's with me sort of like pulling on my kind of belt strap to sort of like just sit down, right? So we're like, okay. So like, there we are. We're just gonna have to push on. Right? They're saying they've not checked them. This is a huge hole now that they're going to rely on to try and explain away these problems. So the first witness comes in, and she's given evidence from the embassy in the Middle East, because she was the detective who led with it, and now she's moved over to the embassy in the Middle East. Prosecutor asks her the questions. It's all very pleasant. And then I ask my question. I cross-examine her. And I ask the question, did you check the speed camera network when you first started this investigation, which would have been 4 or 5 months after the alleged crimes? She goes, yes. The detective who's just said no to the judge is now shrinking by the minute into his chair. The judge is like writing some notes down. And I said, we've had experts since your departure who have all agreed that nothing could stop these cameras being activated, and there's no activations. Yet the GPS is saying speeds of upwards of 100 mile an hour past these cameras. And she says, well, some of these would have had wet film in them. like old cameras in the UK have literally film in them. Now, obviously, we've spent 2.5 years researching this case. I'll tell you where every one of those cameras are, what the serial numbers of those cameras are. And I said, you're quite right. Out of the 105 speed cameras, there's 2 that have wet film. How do you explain the other 103? And she's like, that's just my opinion. And the judge kind of looks at her and says, excuse me, if the experts have said this, would you still stand by your opinion? Just my opinion. So it went well. I think it went well. We got that first witness out of the way. We're pushing on now. So how it sort of works in the UK courts is the prosecution will present their case, and then at half time, the judge will decide whether you can, in sort of certain circumstances, submit a no case to answer, say, look, that case is so poor, the jury can't decide on it. The judge can just throw it out under certain circumstances. So the witnesses have come forward. We've cross-examined the police officers involved with the investigation, and we come to the half time. Now, we've presented no case to answer, and it's quite a clever sort of legal precedent, which was R.V. Milton. You need to look this guy up. He was a police officer in the Midlands in the UK, and he was driving at 155 miles an hour on the M54 near Telford, and the black box in his police car obviously logged it all, and the police decided to prosecute the policeman. And he argued that he was testing his driving ability and that he was an experienced driver and he was evaluating his skills. And what came from it was this statute, basically, that speed alone is not sufficient for dangerous driving. Police officers and ambulances will break the speed limit to respond to emergencies, and speed alone is not enough. Now, I was charged with dangerous driving. The reason why I was charged with dangerous driving is we have a 6-month statute of limitations in the UK. So they only found out about it about 8 months after it happened. So they were basically trying to negate that by saying, we'll do dangerous driving because we can negate the statute of limitations on speeding. However, it's a much higher threshold. So our argument at half time was speed alone's not enough. Even if what they say is true, to drive fast is not enough. The roads allegedly were good. There was no traffic. It was the middle of the night. So this was our argument. Now, the prosecution hadn't heard of this case or didn't think this case would be applicable. So we hand in this case for no case to answer, sort of a submission. And the judge goes away to his chambers to look at it, and he's a bit of time. And he comes back and he sits down and he's like, when I first heard of this case, I was reminded of R.V. Milton. The prosecution are scrambling now thinking, what is this case? And they're looking at it because they're thinking there's no way this is getting thrown out at half time over some technicality. And he looks and he says, I have given it some thought. Speed alone is not sufficient for dangerous driving. However, to drive that length at those speeds, as the prosecution allege, would be considered dangerous from a fatigue or endurance point of view. And in my mind, I'm like, let me introduce you to some guys over in the States, right? This is just pop to the shops for them. And he says, in my view, there is a case to answer and we'll proceed with the defense. So we're like, right, okay, we're trying everything. So it's like, right, we're going to have to go the whole hog now. So we're now relying on the jury's verdict. So we have a jury of 12 that have been brought in. You don't pick a jury in the UK, they're just randomly selected. However, when they walked in, it did look like VINwiki had sent a busload down. It was just young lads all coming in. There was a couple of ladies that we called the Karen, all face masked up, and she was giving me the evils. So we then come to defending the case. Now, I had no witnesses of the fact. It was just some expert witnesses. So I had my GPS expert and my speed camera expert, but I had no witnesses of fact. So they're cross-examined. It's all very, very technical now. Cell site, GPS, the whole thing sort of comes to a head now of the jury are looking a bit bemused because the speed cameras that are Home Office type approved are saying there's no speeding. The speed camera experts are saying, I'd find it bizarre that if the prosecution say what's happened has happened, there wouldn't be at least a few out of that 105 that would have caught a car. They sort of say, well, maybe he slowed down for the cameras. And I'm like, well, that's not quite a crime now, is it, right? If you're slowing down for a speed camera, that's basically what they're there for, right? What you're trying to say is if you're driving at, say, 80 on the motorway in the UK and it's 70, you have 2 choices. Speed through the camera and take the ticket, or slow down and pervert the course of justice and go to jail for 12 months. So the judge wasn't having any of it. He was like, no. Everyone slows down for speed cameras. So they're in this sort of area where they kind of, are you trying to say this speed camera network's wrong? The system that you use to prosecute millions of motorists up and down the country every day of the week could be wrong? This was a whole can of worms they did not want to open. So it was all smoke and mirrors and just sort of skirt around it. So there was this big hole and the jury is sort of like, But then they're like, but why would he have this fuel cell and lights and all this stuff in the car? Because when they seized the car, it was fuel celled up. It had all these lights and sirens and detectors, V1s and all this stuff that is so alien in the UK. So there was this, credible question of like, right, even though it doesn't matter why I've got them, the jury deserve an answer of why. On the C2C Express, I'd met Sergeant James Snow, and he's involved with the Cannonball Memorial Run charity, and they raise money for fallen police officers. It's a completely unbelievable charity, and something so for us over in the UK is just like, wow, it's something we don't really think about on a daily basis. And I got on really well with him, such a nice guy. And when I was in this sort of predicament, I was like, I need to be able to explain why my car is it is without me just saying why it is. And I thought, who better than a sergeant for the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department to explain why the car would be like it is. And he wrote this letter that was so good that it's framed now in my office. And he basically explains that I was invited in 2018 to do the C2C Express. And as I say to the jury, I couldn't go because the police took the car off me and I was arrested a few weeks before. And that I did go in 2019. And cars in the US usually have fuel cells, and radar and laser defense systems are common in the eastern states due to illegal speed traps. And I'm explaining to the jury because I'm giving evidence at this point, so I'm in the dock. And obviously because I'm representing myself, it's basically a monologue because there's no one on my side to ask questions. So I'm explaining this sort of the C2C and everything like that within reason, and the prosecution are trying to object to this because they do not want this letter to be read in court because they've had it for a few months and they realise, oh, right, this explains so much and we can't rely on this. Well, yeah, but why would he have that? And this amazing letter from Sergeant Snow explains why you'd have the fuel cell, the laser defense systems, and he even goes on to say, and I'm humbled to say this, more people should be like Mr. Davies, and signs it off with his CV where he's like, to the UK, he's like a Hollywood star. It's like SWAT and California Highway Patrol. It's like he was a movie star. The UK police must have thought he was fake. They must have checked him out because there's no way. They were thinking when that dropped on their desk that this can't be real. And we submitted photos in the jury bundle of Sergeant Snow with William Barr, the Attorney General at the time. They're looking at photographs of me and Sergeant Snow, and then Sergeant Snow with William Barr, the Attorney General, and we're shaking hands, and it's just beautiful to see. And you can just see the jury kind of going, oh, that makes sense. And then like the lights and everything's like, I've done rallies around Europe. Here's photographs of me in Monaco with the signboard and everything like that. I give evidence on the stand. I'm cross-examined, which is very uncomfortable. And I think the prosecution thought that me bringing the Jag over was a lie. So he's trying to ask me questions like, well, how would you bring the Jag over? And I'm like, I'll talk about this all day because I did do it, right? So I'm explaining, he quickly backs off it because he realizes he has actually taken a Jag to the US. This isn't just some fairy tale. We've tendered all the evidence. We're on the Thursday of the trial. We've started on the Monday. And the judge is basically saying it's now closing statements. Now, unbeknownst to me, there's a little like old school law written into the law books where if these criteria are sort of satisfied, the prosecution don't get a closing statement. Now, this was news to me, right? We didn't know about this until the prosecutor was arguing with the judge about it. So if you represent yourself at Crown Court and you tender no witnesses of fact, so they're witnesses like expert witnesses, it's at the judge's discretion whether the prosecution get a closing statement. So the judge is saying the defense, Mr. Davies, will have a closing statement. The prosecution will not under Part 25 of the Criminal Procedure Rule. And the prosecutor stands up and he goes, Your Honour, it's at your discretion. And the judge turns to him through his spectacles and go, I know. You're not having one. Like that. And we're like, oh my God, this is huge. Because bearing in mind, they've not really heard from the prosecutor since probably Tuesday evening, Wednesday. So I say, Your Honour, if I could request that I give my closing statement tomorrow, because it's about 2-3 o'clock now. And he looks and he goes, yes, okay, court adjourned. So I've got all night to basically prepare some sort of closing statement, thinking that now the jury are literally just going to hear me talk tomorrow and then go and make a decision. So just hoping that memories are short and they'll just hear me last. The prosecution aren't happy about this, but, it's a nice little bit of luck on our side. So that night we go home. Press is really kicked off. From day one, there's been a court reporter there. Day two, the paparazzi are outside. I've been snapped by the Sun newspaper walking out. Day three, there's all press in the gallery. And although you can't see what's happening in court, you can listen in. So we've got the Press Association, BBC News, and you can see these names all dialed in, listening to how this case is going. So there's a lot of eyes on it now, and people are sending me links online, and I'm just ignoring because the last thing I want to do is start reading the press and how it's going and things. So I'm sitting there with my friend who's been with me. I'm just saying it's done, basically. All I've got now is my closing statement, and I'm just thinking, this is going to end badly. Like, my child now is 8 weeks old, my first child. Things are getting pretty serious now. There's nothing else I can do. And the way we were feeling was the prosecution were going to try by hook or by crook to get this case over the line. And there's just no way of knowing. You can't Google anything. You can't phone anyone to go, how do you think it's going to go? You have no idea. So I'm trying to just write some sort of closing statement or something. And it's like, it just can't do it. It's like, I'm just sat there like, oh my God, this is getting pretty heavy. And at the time, I'll be getting notifications from VINwiki and it's like, oh, Arnie's just the COVID runs and Arnie's done this. And it's like, and I'm just there going, oh my days, I was born in the wrong country. And like, it's all getting pretty serious. So we get into there, the jury are all sworn back in and they're all put in. And I go up to the dock now to basically do a closing statement. So he says I've got about 25 to 35 minutes. Now that is a long time to just talk without sort of waffling on. So I look at the jury for the first time. I'm sort of really looking at them now and sort of, engaging with them, and I explain and we're looking through and summing up the case my way, really, saying that there's no one who puts me behind the wheel at any time. The cameras haven't gone off. There's no evidence to show that this even really happened. We're relying on a ropey GPS tracker that's been debunked by the GPS doctors and all this sort of stuff. I do my closing statement, talk for about 25, 30 minutes, explaining every key bits of the case and basically pulling out all the holes in the case how it doesn't make sense. I thank the jury and say, whatever your decision is today, just thank you for bringing this nightmare to an end. And then I turn to the prosecutor who, we've got to know quite well now, I guess, trying to be, amicable and that, shake his hand. And he was a fellow Welshman as well, which was quite cutting for me. So shook his hand and wished him well, whatever the decision may be. And now we have to go and just wait in the waiting room. How long? Again, you can't Google this, it's just how it is. So we're sitting there waiting and an hour passes, and on the tannoy it says all parties in the case of the Queen versus Davies report to court 1. And this is like, next time I'm walking to this room a free man, I could not be leaving this room, because in terms of sentencing, if I was found guilty, it was likely the judge would say, I know enough to be able to sentence him here and there. So we walk back in, and I'm just about to go into this dock where I'd have to be for sentencing, because it's all the full ceremony and everything. People are bowing when they walk into the room who work there and stuff. We've not reached a decision yet. The jury have some questions, and we're like, oh, what could the questions be, right? So we sit down, and there's a bit of a technicality here where they can't be given this letter that we've read to them because it's been redacted heavily, because the witness wouldn't turn up for court. He'd gone missing, a prosecution witness, which was ideal for us, and I think we know why he didn't want to turn up. And on the way up to Scotland, I was actually stopped speeding. I was caught by Scottish police in a car, and I was stopped for speeding. I was doing 84 in a 50, I think, and I was caught with a Pro Laser 4 gun, clean, no problem, signed the ticket, no problem at all. Now, these police officers were contacted because these are the only guys who see me in Scotland around the time of these alleged crimes happen. Now, what was interesting about it is, on the route to verdict, the first kind of question was, if you are not sure that Mr. Davies drove his Audi S5 vehicle, you must acquit him of all charges. This was the first question they have to get past. If you think he did, go to question 1, which is, do you think he drove dangerously, and so on and so on. So the fact that we're being brought back into court because the jury want to read the statement from this officer, we're thinking they can't answer that first question, and the only guy who sees me in a car is this officer, the officer who didn't turn up to trial, funnily enough, and we'd had to redact things that I disagreed that I'd said on that night. So the judge read it out to them instead and read those things, and I'm sorry, there is nothing of note or modification in the car, and that's it. The jury go, okay, thank you. Back to the deliberation room. So it's like, back into this room, just pacing around. It's torture, honestly, the worst feeling imaginable. We're thinking, trying to pick positives out of it, but also not trying to raise your hopes. We're like, oh, well, they can't get past question 1. This could be good. This could be good. But also, like, I'm also trying to prepare myself for, you're not going home for Christmas and, get your overnight bag, or not your overnight bag, it would be your 6-year bag, and to go to prison. So another 3 hours pass now. We're 4 hours in. And funny enough, it's coming up to 5 o'clock on a Friday. And we come back into court. And I go into the dock. They've reached a verdict. The jury all come back in. The foreman's chosen. Obviously, we don't know who he is. He stands up. Have you reached a verdict? Yes. Is it unanimous? No. Like, okay. So in the UK, majority would be 10 or more one way. So we're like, right, okay, well, there's either, I'm thinking, God, is it 10 people want to convict me or 10 people want to acquit me? So in count 1, how do you find the defendant? Guilty or not guilty? Not guilty. We're like, prosecution are like, well, this is all a bit of a blur now, because it just becomes a roll, because it's like, in my head, I'm quickly doing the calculation, like, well, if I'm not guilty on the first one, it has to be a home sweet, right? Count 2, not guilty. Count 3, not guilty. Count 4, not guilty. Count 5, not guilty. Count 6, not guilty. Like that's like, oh my God, right? The judge just turns to me, bearing in mind we've had months in court and we've been here all week. You're free to go, Mr. Davis. Bang, gets up and leaves. And you're just like, oh, okay, right, all right. Security guard's like, good lad, because he's been following the trial the whole time. You go get your car. I have to walk through this door on the right to get my phone because they've taken all my belongings off me, because if I'm found guilty, it's basically strap him up and put him in the paddy wagon and take him down to the holding cell. So I've taken all the stuff off me in case I do a runner. I don't know what they're thinking. So I have to go through the prison door first, which is a real surreal feeling. So I leave with the press are all there, all writing, prosecution, the detectives, everyone's all there. It's a full court. I walk into this room, right? I'm like just in shock, right? It's middle of COVID, and I give the security guard a big hug, and he's like, oh, but we hug it out. Don't know who he was. What a guy. And get my phone and stuff. I walk back into the glass dock. Everyone's gone, right? There's my buddy there, standing there, and the judge is gone. There's just the clerks, and the prosecutor is still there, and he's just staring up into the corner there and won't turn. I come out, I give my buddy a big hug. We walk out into sort of the reception foyer area. Press are like, you want to make a comment? You make a comment? Do you want to make a comment? And I'm like, whoa, geez, right. So we walk back into this waiting room to like order a taxi or something. And the press are like trying to come in and stuff. My buddy's like, he's not making comment. He's turned into my PR guy. I don't want to see any press. I just want to go home, right? So it's all settling in and everything like that. We order the taxi, and because cameras aren't allowed on court grounds, nowhere near them, they can literally only be at the door and the stairs that come down. So we're at the top of the stairs. We're looking down and we can see tripods and loads of feet and everything. And my buddy goes down there and looks, and he's like, there's live camera crews there and news vans, satellite stuff. And it's like, we're going, oh, no, that makes sense. Murder in court too. The verdict's just come through. He's guilty. Be about that. It wasn't about that. It was about this run. Right, the taxi pulls up, I run into the taxi, they're all there, flash, 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 flash. We all jump in the taxi and go down the road, get back to the hotel. The receptionist at the hotel has been following the trial all week in the papers, the local papers and stuff, and she's like, oh, well done, like that. It was brilliant, because they were like we get stuff printed every morning at the local print house, so they were literally seeing the evidence coming off, and they were like, best of luck today, mate, best of luck. So we get there, sit in, and it's like, wow, just a moment now, back in this hotel room. So I say to my buddy, I said, look, we're 120 miles from Land's End. I said, it's like 6 o'clock now. I said, let's not drive home. Let's end this where it started. So we get in the car and we drive all the way down to the Land's End Hotel, and we have a steak dinner at the Land's End Hotel. And we're sat there and it's just surreal. And then on the news, it's a live, like on ITV News in the UK. And they're like, Tommy Davis has just been cleared of all charges at the Crown Court. Back to you in the studio. And it's all like proper doom. We're like, oh my days. Radio 4, all the radios were putting it on. And it's like, Tommy Davis has been cleared of all charges. It's like gone out of hand, where it's like newspapers, everything. And the murder that had happened, the murder trial, same week, nothing. I never felt so bad for publicity almost, because it was like this guy had been stabbed and it was a real serious local murder case. He's probably got a tiny little piece in the local paper, and it's just my stupid face coming out of court with a face mask on, being cleared of all these crazy charges. So the next morning we're there and we get some photographs and everything like that. And I say to this is the Land's End Cafe where people finish or start these pilgrimages. And there's the signpost, very much like the Portofino. And I say to him, what is the fastest time between John O'Groats and Land's End? And obviously I've got a face mask on. And the guy goes, well, funny you say that. He says, someone's just been cleared of all the charges last night for doing it in 9.5 hours. And I'm like, whoa, no way. Oh, anyway, nice to see you. See you later. Send a postcard home, get in the car, drive home, and just like sit in the car for that journey home. Just unbelievable. So a bit of a warning for all these American guys. We've always sort of thought about like, what would happen if a prosecutor in Utah or Texas just thought, no, I've had enough. Don't take your phone with you. Don't post everything online straight away. Just picture the worst, because it happened to me. But I was lucky.
Guys, watch out! I just got my doors blown off by a cop car heading to California. When the lockdown came, honestly, I just wanted to go out and drive. Not only because the roads were empty, but also because people said, well, you shouldn't do that. It's unsafe. I promised my wife that I wouldn't do any more cannonballing after 27-25. And I stuck to that promise. But I was certainly begging because I had been on a number of essential trips, and I saw how empty the roads were and just how much joy it brought me to drive when there was nobody else on the road and nobody hogging the left lane. It was like all of the Karens had stayed home, and they were the same people who sit and park in the left lane and never move over. So it was a truly awesome experience being out on the road and just driving fast everywhere. So I got to watch two other teams make runs, the ones that I had helped scout, and both of them were in imminent danger of taking our record. And it was certainly a little bit of a stressful time, very emotional time for me. I wanted to see somebody that I knew and respected carry the torch, take the record, but I certainly didn't want it to happen that quickly. Those two guys didn't end up beating the record, so I was able to go to sleep that Sunday night. But then we got a message that somebody else that we had never heard of was closing in on our record and was about to beat it, and they certainly did. Some of you heard about the 2638 story and the borrowed Audi, and it was certainly hard to accept that that was how it had gone down. Just because there was no traffic and no cops, somebody jumped in a car and went out and beat our time, especially after we had spent so much time and effort and poured emotion and years of planning into beating Ed's record.
So after my Mercedes got wrecked on April 4th, I was pretty heartbroken, but I did think that maybe God was telling me, like, you're kind of done with this whole Cannonball thing.
Just when I thought that I had come to grips and made my peace with being retired and just seeing the record go away, my wife sends me a text message. And she essentially said, who am I to impose my ethics on you if you were doing this with a clear conscience? And I think this actually is safe to do when there's nobody else on the road. And I don't like how you kind of lost the record. And if you want to make a run during the quarantine, you have my blessing. And I'm like, great. Now you say it. I can't call your bluff. Arnie's car got wrecked. What the heck am I going to do now? So I called up Arnie and said, all right, I've got permission.
How are we going to come up with a car as traffic is starting to mount? People are not following the whole quarantine thing, so we had to do something quick. And the quickest alternative was Troy's Corvette that he had run in the Cannonball a couple times, and Doug bought it. So he sends it to me to kind of go through it and make sure that it's ready to go. We had about a week's worth of work we had to do to it. I took the car out on the Monday before we were supposed to go and realized that there is no way that I'm driving this fiberglass sports car across the country at those speeds. It just didn't feel right, and I knew I had to go back to the German sedan. So I knew that my buddy Eric had this Audi S6 that had some mild work done to it that he had promised that he would sell me when he was done with it. So I called him on Tuesday morning and I said, Eric, I got to level with you. I need to make another run. My Mercedes is wrecked and I need to buy your car. And he's like, well, you're in luck. I just bought a GTR and I'm looking to sell it. I said, I'll be there in 30 minutes. So I picked the thing up at noon on Tuesday and the 3-day Cannonball build began. In Cannonball, my favorite part is building the car and preparing, which in this circumstance, we're both out the window. So the build of this car was going to be like a reality show where you build it in a few days. But in this reality show, we were actually going to build it in a few days. So the car is a hodgepodge of Cannonball cars that I had. We stripped all of the countermeasures off my Ford LTD that we were going to run in the C2C Express in 2019. We robbed the fuel system out of the E63. We took the electronic stack out of the Corvettes. We took the CB antenna and a couple other odds and ends off of my Crown Vic from the 2904. And in a few days, we had ourselves a Cannonball car. So what's funny about the Audi S6 is it was actually the car that I wanted to build in the first place before the Mercedes. But seeing that AMS did not have a bunch of parts for the S6 like they did the E63, I wanted to run a full alpha packaged car. And at the time they didn't do tuning and really only had a couple parts. So that's why I chose the E63. But the reason I wanted to do the S6 is it can kind of be disguised as a Ford Taurus. So seeing we were pretty late in the whole quarantine thing, we were already into May, the traffic was already really picked up, and really the only advantage we were going to have would be leaving Manhattan at any time we wanted. So the plan was to leave at 6 p.m. and get through Denver before 8 a.m. the next morning.
Here we go to New York. I called in my former co-driver, Dunadell, who ran with me in the C2C in Ultra Beige and helped me win the 2018 run because Berkeley was unavailable and Dunadell was absolutely ready to go, waiting for the call.
My Cannonball story started in about middle school when I read about Alex Roy's record, and then progressed when Ed's record broke in 2013. I remember vividly meeting Doug Tabbitt at a Cars and Coffee in Cleveland. It was July 4th, if I remember correctly. And essentially, we were drawn to each other by both of us having antennas and screens in our cars. My GLI and his Corvette were both very reminiscent of vehicles we had seen and looked up to, Alex's M5 and Ed's CL, all vehicles that we, strive to emulate almost. Doug and I became fast friends and maintained a good friendship over the next couple of years. And it really blossomed when Doug tapped me to be his co-driver in the Monte Carlo, now dubbed Ultra Beige, for the 2017 C2C Express. Of course, that run ended rather haphazardly in Indiana on the side of the road at a transmission shop of all places. And then we progressed to 2018, of course, finishing, also heartbreaking, but still winning in Ultra Beige. And then moving on to 2019, unfortunately, when Doug and Arnie were looking for a third co-pilot, I was unable to make it. I was starting a job that week, and I decided to, pass the torch, and I gave the opportunity, which, of course, the 2019 C2C became a trial run for the 27-25 run later that year in the E63. So as soon as I heard that Doug, Arnie, and Berkeley had set the record, I was ecstatic, but also part of me had a little bit of a heartstring pull, and I felt that, the next opportunity I got to, if anything ever happened, I would be lining up at Doug's door and Arnie's door to be the third man. And lo and behold, as soon as 2638 came out, I remember calling Doug and said, when are we going? When are we going? And he sort of said, well, I've got to talk to my wife and whatnot. A few days later, I got the call and we were headed to New York.
And it was eerie in New York City because there's no cars, but there was people and bikes everywhere. And the new risk was driving through an intersection, even if you had a green light, you might have bicyclists just running the red lights. It was like there's no traffic laws anymore. Cars didn't have the right of way. So that presented a new challenge. But because of the lack of traffic, we were able to make it out of Manhattan in 4.5 minutes and got stuck at one red light, and that annoyed us, which is crazy because usually Manhattan is just, you're stopped all the way out. So we quickly got up to speed and we're on the way.
Honestly, it almost felt too easy. Like it didn't even feel like this was even gonna count, because up to then we had, no problems at all.
We had an incredible team of scouts lined up that had our backs, that wanted to see us get the record, and that helped us out in Pennsylvania because we came up on 2 PA state troopers in short succession. And thankfully we had just passed one of our scouts. So we called him and said, hey, we need you to come take one for the team, because we had no idea how long we might be stuck behind him. And so he came flying up and got ready to pass one of them, and the trooper got off at the exit. So we took off again. 5 minutes later, get stuck behind another one. Call him up. Hey, it's your time. So he comes flying up and gets ready to pass him again, and he turns around in the median. So thankfully, we didn't have to pay his ticket for him, but we were able to continue on and not get stuck behind the troopers for a while, because that can certainly take a lot of time off.
So across the Midwest, we were hauling. That was where we had a couple of 125 mile an hour averages across multiple states, and we were able to get our average to Denver up to 120, which is exactly where we needed to be sub 26 hours. So one of the biggest problems with this car is at 160 miles an hour, there's this crazy, like air buffeting, like whining noise that you just can't drive faster than that, or otherwise it'll drive you crazy. So that definitely kept our top speed down. So at no point did we exceed 175 miles an hour.
We got to about Iowa, had a hiccup. I honestly thought we were done. I had wanted to get Michelin Pilot 4S tires, but they were on back order. So we settled on the Continental Extreme DWS, which was a great idea if we had done the run in April, but we were in May now and it was super hot out. And so they were a little bit spongy for performance driving in warm weather. All of a sudden the car was just like super vague and almost uncontrollable. I'd like turn the wheel to change lanes, and I'd turn back and there'd be like a delay. And then there was this vibration in the front end, and it was all over the board. And I'm like, I mean, it's gotta be tires. It feels like tires that have just gone completely to crap. Or like when you overheat your tires on the track and they're done the heat cycle and they're just like, you're just all over the board. That's what it felt like. And I'm like, there's no way these tires are that bad, but maybe that's it. That's gotta be it. Arnie was asleep in the back, and I told Dunedell, I'm like, I think we just gotta like try to let some air out of the tires. Like maybe that'll help give us a little more grip. But in the back of my mind, I'm going, this is crazy. If they're this shot already, we're never going to make it through the mountain pass. I mean, we're like 1,200 miles into the run. My gut just sank because I'm like, we're done. This is not going to work. This is a Band-Aid. And Arnie woke up and he's like, what the heck is going on? Why are you going 60 miles an hour? I'm like, this car is awful. It's got a mind of its own. And I literally just like took the wheel and did this and just kind of like threw the car, and it did this. It went back and forth both directions. He's like, man, that's crazy. What is wrong? And I'm like, I have no freaking idea. This car is driving itself. And he's like, wait a minute. Do you have the like lane change assist thing on? I'm like, I don't know. What's that? And he's like, there's an icon on the dash. It like has the 2 lanes. I'm like, yeah, that's on. He's like, you moron. That's what the vibration is. Every time you get to the lanes, it's giving you a vibration. It's trying to put you back into the lane. I'm like, oh my goodness. So it took us probably 10 minutes to try to figure out how to turn this darn thing off. And we finally got it turned off, and we're on our way. But that was our big moment of like, we're done. This ain't gonna happen. And it was all just to my idiocy and lack of understanding with technology, because the newest car I own is a 2000 Mercedes and has heated seats and rain sensing wipers. Ooh.
So to me in cannonballing, the most important thing is safety. And just like the 27-25 run, we weren't passing people at excessive speeds. There was no passing on the shoulder. And a lot of people are dumbfounded. You know, they think it's like the movies, like it's a real life Dukes of Hazzard or something, which it's far less dramatic than that. And given the less traffic, it was quite a bit easier.
Arnie is a master of disguise. The E63 was awesome. The S6 was awesomer because it sort of looked like a patrol car. However, I'm not sure which was a better disguise, because the E63 became known as the silver passenger car because that's what was described over the scanner when we got called in Iowa. Perfect. Could be anybody. However, the S6, while it probably kept us from getting called in multiple times because people mistook it for a police car, it bit us when we got called in Colorado because the person was incredibly descriptive and even called out the unit number and he knew it was an Audi dressed up to look like a patrol car, and that's what came over the scanner. So we're like, well, there's no mistaking that they are looking for us. So Arnie's driving. I'm frantically looking for a way around because we heard the cop report back, and he goes, yeah, I'm at M4 such and such. I'll be waiting for him. So I'm going, all right, we got to get off on surface streets. There's like 13 miles to the border of Utah. So let's just take surface streets to get around this and get there. So I'm looking at the map. I'm trying to figure out where the cop said he was going to be. And I finally realized that, you know, when they called us in, they reported us at mile marker 18. We were moving so quickly that by the time it came over the scanner transmission, we were at mile marker 13, and we had already passed the cop in the median that had said he was waiting for us. So I figured that out, and I'm like, Arnie, friggin' hammer down, let's make it to the border. There's nothing between here and there. So we did. We got out clean. We're good to go.
The traffic, the situation we ran into in California was horrendous. And despite having spotters ahead of us and people trying to, you know, give us a hand, you know, there was no moment, as Ed always says, there was a moment where you could have set the cruise control and beat the record in California. But we never had that moment. We never had that moment where, you know, we had these moving targets. We never had the chance to just put our foot down and know that we were going to be the fastest time. We knew we were up there. But we didn't know that we were going to be the fastest time.
The disguise proved to be effective, though, because one of our scouts that led us through Nevada, right as we get to the California border, we pass him, and he's on the phone with us the whole time, and he's like, guys, watch out. I just got my doors blown off by a cop car heading to California. And we're like, no, we just passed you. He's like, no, there's a cop car just flying south. He's going towards California. You guys better watch out. And this is a car guy, right? He should know better. And we're like, no, that was us. We just passed you. We're that car. He's like, oh, okay.
To me, the run was momentous. Being part of a team that was able to achieve such a feat in such dire circumstances was incredible.
Part of the reason I wanted to do a COVID run was everybody who cannonballs wants to know what it would be like to do the ultimate run. The perfect situation, the perfect car, and the perfect team. I found the perfect co-driver in Arnie, and the car was just about as good as it gets, and there was no traffic. And that was just so much fun because on the 27-25 run, we're battling with all of the normal circumstances, the traffic, the left lane drivers, and there was just nobody on the roads. And it was a lot of fun to be able to cruise at 140, 160 miles an hour and not be bothering anybody.
So on Sunday afternoon, we pulled into the Portofino. We had traveled 2,816 miles in 25 hours and 39 minutes with an overall average speed of 110 miles an hour across the whole country. The feeling pulling in, for once we actually had people there. We weren't pulling up in the middle of the night. There were some people there to greet us and to film us coming in. But I gotta say that it just didn't have the same feeling as 27-25. When we had done 27-25, it was more about doing something that that hadn't been done and was possibly couldn't be done. And 25-39, while it cements us as the fastest to ever cross the country, it just didn't feel the same. This run had quite a different feeling than 27-25. For that run, there was really no blueprint, and the record had stood for so long that it had a sense of accomplishment that was far greater than this. For 25-39, everybody knew that this was the time to do it. You had so much less to overcome, so much less traffic, so much fewer cops. So while it's a great achievement, it just doesn't have the same impact to me as 27-25 did.